brain in a vat. All right, imagine this with me. What if I told you that everything you're seeing, hearing, even feeling right now isn't real? Not in the way you think it is. Your cozy couch, the cup of coffee in your hand, the sound of birds outside, they could all be illusions. Weird, right? Sounds like something out of the Matrix, but philosophers have been seriously thinking about this for decades. It's called the brain in a vat scenario. And yes, it's as creepy as it sounds. So here's the basic idea. Picture your brain, just your brain, floating in a jar, completely separated from your body. Now imagine this brain is hooked up to a super advanced computer. This computer sends signals to your brain that mimic real-life experiences, the taste of pizza, the feeling of sunshine on your skin, even the sound of your best friend laughing. To your brain, it all feels completely real. You have no clue that your entire world is actually just electrical impulses in a vat of goo. I know what you're thinking. No way, that's insane. My life is real. But here's the trick. There's no way to prove it isn't happening. Every sense you have, sight, touch, hearing, could be fooled by a perfectly programmed simulation. You could be a brain in a vat right now and never know it. Scary thought, huh? Or maybe exciting, depending on how much you like sci-fi. Now, here's where it gets really wild. If this is true, it completely flips how we think about reality. Everything we take for granted, our relationships, our jobs, even this conversation, is based on signals your brain thinks are real. If those signals are fake, then technically, none of it is actually happening outside your mind. Mind blown, right? And philosophers love to ask questions like, if it feels real, does it matter if it's real? Would you still enjoy chocolate if you knew it was just fake signals in your head? Let's make it a bit more personal. Picture your favorite memory, a birthday, a vacation, that perfect sunset. Now imagine a computer could generate that memory for you perfectly. You'd relive it, feel it, even smell it, but none of it actually happened. It's like your brain is living in a dream designed by some unseen programmer. And here's the kicker. There's literally no way to check. You can poke, you can prod, but all your tests are happening inside the simulation, so even skepticism can be simulated. Talk about a mind trap. And yeah, this idea has inspired tons of movies and shows. The Matrix is the obvious one. But even in Inception or certain Black Mirror episodes, they're basically playing with the same question. How do you know your reality is actually real? But philosophers took it seriously long before Hollywood did. It's not just about entertainment. It's a thought experiment that forces us to question everything. What if everything you think you know, every sense you trust, is just a story being fed to your brain? Of course, most people shrug it off. Come on, that's crazy, you might say. But here's the interesting thing. Even if the chances are slim, the possibility is enough to mess with your mind. It makes you think about what reality even means. If being happy, sad, or scared all comes from signals in your brain, maybe the realness of the world doesn't matter as much as how it feels. Or maybe it does. Depends on if you're more of a realist or a dreamer. So, next time you're walking down the street or laughing with a friend, just pause for a second. Could this all be a perfectly crafted illusion? Could your brain literally be in a vat somewhere while you're convinced you're living life? And if that's true, do you want to know? Or is blissful ignorance a better deal? Think about it. Because no matter how hard you try to prove it isn't happening, your brain might already know the answer, and it might be laughing at you. Boltzmann brain. Okay, stick with me, because this one is going to bend your brain in ways it's not ready for. Have you ever stared up at the night sky and felt completely tiny, like the universe is this huge, chaotic mess that you'll never fully understand? Now, imagine that. In all that chaos, there's a chance that you, right here, right now, might just randomly exist. Yeah, I know, it sounds like nonsense, but that's basically the idea behind the Boltzmann brain. Here's the setup. Imagine the universe is infinite, or at least so big and old that crazy stuff happens by chance. According to some physicists and philosophers, in a universe that's just randomly moving and jiggling around, it's more likely for a single brain to randomly pop into existence than for the entire ordered universe we see to appear from scratch. This brain, fully formed, would have memories, thoughts, experiences, all just out of nowhere. Like spontaneous consciousness that didn't evolve, didn't live through childhood, didn't exist before a blink ago. Wild, right? So let's make it personal. Picture sitting at your kitchen table, drinking coffee. You think about your friends, your past, your favorite TV show. Now, what if all of that, the memories, the furniture, the coffee, was just a trick your random, spontaneously formed brain was playing on itself? You'd feel completely real, like you've lived a full life. But in reality, none of it actually happened. The universe didn't have to grow galaxies or evolve life for this one brain to exist. It just popped into being. Insane, right? And here's the kicker. According to the Boltzmann brain hypothesis, this is statistically more likely than creating the entire universe we know. Think about that for a second. All the stars, planets, galaxies, evolution, civilization. It's less likely than a single brain randomly existing, fully aware, fully convinced it has a history. That's the kind of thing that makes you go, wait, maybe my whole life is a hallucination generated by the universe itself. You might be thinking, okay, this is ridiculous. My brain didn't just randomly appear, but the philosophers and physicists who think about this aren't trying to scare you. They're just pointing out a weird consequence of physics and probability. In an infinite universe, weird stuff happens. Like really, really weird. And they use it to ask the question, how can we ever be sure that what we think is real actually is real? How do you know you're not a Boltzmann brain right now, with fake memories, imagining a past that never happened? Now, don't freak out just yet. Most people dismiss it, saying the odds are astronomically tiny. But that's part of what makes it fascinating. It's the kind of thought experiment that doesn't just sit in your head, it sneaks into your everyday life. Next time you remember a childhood memory, or remember laughing at something silly, think about this. What if it didn't really happen? What if it's just your brain spontaneously formed, tricking itself into believing a story that never existed? Suddenly, nostalgia is a little more unsettling, huh? And yeah, philosophers love to argue over this. Some say that if the Boltzmann brain idea were true, we wouldn't even be able to trust science, history, or even our own reasoning, because every thought we have could be part of a random hallucination. But here's the philosophical twist. It forces us to rethink reality, certainty, and even identity. If you can't trust your own memories, then who are you really? Just a brain floating in probability, having a private little universe inside your skull. So here's the fun, terrifying question to leave you with. What if you are a Boltzmann brain right now?
sipping coffee, scrolling through videos, thinking you're a real person with a real history. Would it matter? Would it change anything about your life? Or is the feeling of reality, even if fake, enough to keep living, laughing, and imagining? Think about it. Because whether or not you're a Boltzmann brain, pondering it makes life feel a little bigger, a little stranger, and maybe a little more magical. Or terrifying, depending on your mood.
Solipsism. All right, let's take a mental trip that might make you feel a little lonely, or maybe a lot alone. Have you ever felt like everyone around you is just background noise? Like they're there, but you're not sure they're really thinking or feeling anything outside of how it relates to you? Well, congratulations. You just brushed against the edge of solipsism, the philosophical theory that you are the only thing that can be known to exist for certain. And yeah, it's as weird and unsettling as it sounds. Here's the basic idea. Imagine waking up and realizing that every person, every object, every experience, every memory exists only in your mind. Your friends laughing? Just a projection of your brain. Your favorite coffee shop? Totally your imagination. Even the universe itself? A mental construct. According to solipsism, the only thing you can be 100% sure of is that you exist, because you're the one thinking. Everything else could be a story your mind is telling itself. Freaky, right? Now, before your brain melts completely, think about this scenario. You stub your toe on the coffee table. Pain, right? It hurts. But if solipsism is true, even that pain could just be your mind generating experiences for itself. Your toe might not even exist outside of your consciousness. Suddenly, all the rules of the physical world feel a little optional. Gravity? Maybe just a suggestion. Trees? A figment of your imagination playing a very convincing role. And it's not just about objects. People, their emotions, their words, they could all be products of your consciousness. Your best friend telling you a secret might be you giving yourself a pep talk in disguise. Your annoying coworker, maybe just a mental projection to test your patience. Solipsism turns the whole idea of other people into an existential question mark. You're basically the main character and the only guaranteed reality in your own mental universe. Here's the wild part. This theory isn't just some thought experiment to scare introverts. Philosophers use it to question certainty, knowledge, and existence itself. How do you know that anyone else is real? How can you know that history isn't just something your mind conjured up? Solipsism pushes us to confront a mind-blowing idea. Everything we take for granted could be a story we're telling ourselves. And the scarier twist, if solipsism is true, there's no way to prove it wrong. Nothing outside of your own consciousness can give evidence of existence, because, well, it might not exist. But let's lighten it up a bit. Think of all the power this gives you. You could literally imagine the perfect day, the perfect conversation, the perfect meal. And for your mind, it's real. Want to relive your favorite vacation? Done. Want a pet dragon? Boom, it exists, at least in your mental universe. Solipsism basically makes you the ultimate creator of your own reality. Kinda cool, right? But also a little lonely, because if nobody else is real, who do you really share that universe with? And yeah, most people shrug this off and live like normal humans.
But solipsism lingers in the back of your mind in little ways. Next time someone irritates you or surprises you or even makes you laugh, think about it. What if all of that is just your brain playing with itself? Does it make it any less funny, any less annoying? Or does it make life a little more surreal? So here's the kicker. Solipsism might never be proven or disproven. It's one of those ideas that exists on the edge of thinking too hard about reality. And whether it's true or not, just imagining it is enough to make you question everything. From your coffee cup to your closest friends. Maybe that's terrifying. Maybe it's freeing. Either way, it's a ride. And the next time you look around and see people talking, laughing, living, just remember, in the world of solipsism, they might all just be spectacularly convincing daydreams created by your brain.
Eternal recurrence. Nietzsche. Okay, let's dive into something that will make your brain do somersaults. Imagine your life, every choice, every memory, every awkward moment, every triumph, repeating forever. Not metaphorically, not in your dreams, but literally forever. Infinitely. That's the core idea behind Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. And yeah, it's as wild and slightly terrifying as it sounds. Here's the basic idea. Nietzsche asked us to imagine a scenario. What if, after your death, your entire life was destined to repeat exactly the same way, over and over forever? Every coffee you drank, every argument you had, every laugh, every heartbreak, replaying again and again, with no changes, no pauses, no escape. Now, imagine that you knew this was going to happen. How would you feel about your life? Would you be thrilled, terrified, or somewhere in between? And here's the fun, mind-bending part. Nietzsche didn't present this just as a cosmic joke. He wanted us to use it as a tool to evaluate our lives. If the idea of repeating your life forever fills you with dread, maybe it's a hint that you're not living the way you truly want. Maybe you're stuck in routines, letting life pass by without intention. Eternal recurrence is like a cosmic mirror. It forces you to look at your choices and ask, would I be proud or miserable if I had to live this exact life again 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times? Now, don't panic yet. It's not just about guilt or regret. Imagine your happiest moment, the time you nailed a presentation, got a promotion, or just had a perfect day in the sun. Nietzsche's challenge is, could you embrace your entire life, the good and the bad, the boring and the extraordinary, and say, yes, I would gladly live this forever? It's a way to test your love for life. Not love in some sappy way, but in the sense of fully embracing existence with all its chaos. Here's a scenario for you. Picture spilling coffee on your favorite shirt. Normally, you'd groan, curse, maybe panic a little. But under eternal recurrence, that moment comes back forever, every time. So do all the tiny annoyances and all the victories. And here's the twist. If you can accept it, even laugh at it, you're practicing what Nietzsche called the yes-sayer attitude, a wholehearted affirmation of life, no matter how messy. And yeah, the idea is terrifying if you focus on the bad stuff. Every mistake, every heartbreak, every cringe-worthy memory, repeating endlessly. But Nietzsche's genius was flipping the script. He wasn't trying to punish us. He was offering a radical kind of freedom. If you can embrace life as it is, then nothing can truly hurt you.
You're not trapped in regret, you're empowered by your own acceptance. So here's a little challenge for you. Think about your day so far. The little wins, the little fails. Could you live this exact day again, over and over, forever? Scary? Maybe. Liberating? Definitely. Eternal recurrence is less about cosmic mechanics and more about how you approach life. It's a thought experiment that makes your everyday choices feel enormous. The coffee you sip, the people you meet, the words you say, they all matter, because in Nietzsche's vision, they echo eternally. And the coolest part? It doesn't require belief in metaphysics, gods, or science fiction. You don't need proof that the universe is looping endlessly. You just need to ask yourself, can I live my life in a way that I would gladly embrace over and over again? That question alone can change how you see everything, from your chores to your dreams to the tiny, beautiful moments in between. So next time you feel stuck, annoyed, or like life is meaningless, imagine it repeating forever. Could you smile and say, yes, I'll take it? If you can, congratulations, you're dancing with Nietzsche's wildest, most empowering thought experiment. And if not, well, maybe it's time to start making life worth repeating.
Quantum immortality. All right, get ready, because this next idea is straight up science fiction meets philosophy weirdness. Have you ever thought about what happens if you die? Not in the abstract, we all die someday way, but in the mind-bending, could you ever actually experience death way? That's where quantum immortality comes in. And yeah, it's as wild and slightly terrifying as it sounds. Here's the setup. Quantum mechanics tells us that particles exist in multiple states at the same time until observed. They're in this crazy superposition. Now imagine applying that idea to you. In theory, every possible outcome of every event happens in some version of reality. So if there's even a tiny chance that you survive a deadly event, there's a universe where you do survive. And in that universe, you're still conscious. Boom! Quantum immortality. So let's make it concrete. Picture this. You're about to take a risky leap off a cliff into the water. In most universes, you might hit the rocks and, well, die. But in some super tiny probability universe, you somehow land perfectly, survive, and keep living. From your perspective, you never die, because you can only experience the realities where you're still alive. Every time something life-threatening happens, your consciousness jumps to the version of reality where you survive. Trippy, right? And here's the creepy part. If quantum immortality is true, then you are effectively immortal, but only from your own perspective. Everyone else still faces the normal risks of life. You could, theoretically, survive things that are statistically impossible, and the universe would just keep creating those realities for you. Your friends, your family, they might not make it, but you'd keep experiencing life. Suddenly, life is equal parts miraculous and horrifying. Now, imagine thinking like this every day. Crossing the street? You could survive a car crash that kills everyone else around you because your consciousness only exists in the worlds where you don't die. It's exhilarating, terrifying, and honestly, kind of lonely. Because if you really take this seriously, your survival is a series of increasingly improbable escapes, leaving everyone else behind. It's like being the last player in an infinite game of reality. But quantum immortality isn't just a horror story. It's also a mind experiment about existence, probability, and the meaning of survival.
It asks us, what does it mean to live if death is just a branch in an infinite multiverse you never experience? Does living forever change how you value the small moments? Or does it make them meaningless because you'll always survive somehow? And it really makes you think about perspective. From the universe's perspective, life and death happen normally. But from your perspective, death never touches you. Reality becomes intensely subjective. And yes, it's not proven. Right now, it's mostly theoretical, a weird crossover of physics and philosophy. But the mental exercise is insane. It forces you to question how much of our reality is just a perspective. How much does chance govern our lives? And if survival is guaranteed from your own consciousness, does that change how you act? Or how reckless you might get? So here's the brain-bending question to leave you with. If quantum immortality is real, and your consciousness always survives, how would that change the way you live today? Would you take wild risks? Would you savor every single moment? Or would the knowledge that you can't really die make life kind of meaningless? Think about it. Because in this wild version of reality, you might already be the luckiest, weirdest immortal being in the multiverse, just existing, surviving, and watching possibilities unfold in ways that no one else could ever understand. The Ship of Theseus. All right, get ready for a philosophical brain teaser that will make you question, well, you. Have you ever looked at an old object, a chair, a phone, maybe even your favorite sneakers, and wondered, if I replace parts of it over time, is it still the same thing? That's basically the problem of the Ship of Theseus. And trust me, it's weirder than it sounds. Here's the story. Theseus was a hero from ancient Greece. He had a ship, a really famous ship. Over time, the wooden planks of the ship started rotting, so they were replaced one by one. Eventually, every single plank was replaced with new wood. Now, here's the mind-bending question philosophers ask. Is it still the same ship? And if someone collected all the old planks and rebuilt them into a ship, which one is the real Ship of Theseus? Think about that for a second. You see a boat, but none of the original wood is in it. Is it still the same boat you read about in the history books? And if you reconstruct the original planks into a new ship, is that the original ship now? Suddenly, identity isn't simple anymore. It's messy, slippery, and deeply confusing, but also fascinating. And here's why it hits so close to home. This isn't just about ships, it's about you. Our bodies constantly replace cells. Every few years, you have mostly new atoms than you did before. Every memory, every skill, every thought shapes who you are. So here's a wild thought. Are you the same person you were 10 years ago? What about 10 minutes ago? If every part of you changes over time, what does it mean to be the same you? Let's make it more relatable. Picture your favorite pair of shoes. Over the years, you replace the sole, the laces, maybe even the fabric. At some point, none of the original material remains. Is it still your favorite pair of shoes? You know it is, right? But philosophically, it's exactly the same dilemma. Identity doesn't always match material reality. It's about continuity, function, and the story we tell ourselves about something or someone. Now, imagine applying this to relationships. You know the friends or partners you've had for years. Both of you change constantly. New experiences, new habits, new thoughts. Are they still the same people you first met? Are you still the same person they first met? It's a little unnerving when you think about it, because it suggests that everything we consider permanent, our bodies, objects, relationships, is always in flux. Identity isn't a static thing. It's a living, shifting process. And the debate gets even crazier. Some philosophers argue that continuity, like memory, history, and function, is what makes something the same, not the material itself. Others insist that if all the original pieces are gone, the thing is fundamentally different. There's no definitive answer, which is exactly why this thought experiment has survived thousands of years. It's a question we can't answer, but it makes us think deeply about how we define identity in our lives. So here's the kicker. Every time you change something about yourself, your body, your habits, your environment, you're living the ship of Theseus' paradox. Are you still you? Is your life the same life you started with? Philosophers argue about it endlessly, but you don't have to get stuck in analysis paralysis. Just realize that identity is flexible, personal, and maybe even a little mysterious. Next time you look at something old that's been repaired, rebuilt, or restored, your favorite chair, an heirloom, or even yourself, ask, is it still the same thing? Or is it something entirely new pretending to be the old thing? And maybe, just maybe, the beauty is that it can be both at the same time.
Brain duplication problem. All right, buckle up, because this next one is going to get seriously trippy. Imagine this. A scientist somehow manages to create an exact copy of your brain. Every neuron, every memory, every thought perfectly duplicated. Not a clone of you physically, just your brain and consciousness replicated down to the tiniest detail. Sounds like sci-fi, right? But philosophers actually love to ask, if there are now two of you, which one is really you? Are you both you, or is neither you? Welcome to the brain duplication problem. Here's the weird part. Both brains would think they are the real you. Both would remember your past, your first kiss, that time you embarrassed yourself in front of your teacher. Both would feel like the authentic, continuous version of you. But obviously, from an external perspective, there are now two separate conscious entities. So which one counts as the real you? And does it even make sense to say that one is real and the other is fake? Now, let's make it personal. Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding another you standing in the mirror, or maybe sipping coffee across from you. Both of you think you're the original. Who gets your job, your friends, your life story? And more importantly, how do you feel about it? Does having a duplicate ruin the idea of you being special, or does it expand the possibilities of what you can experience? Here's where it gets even crazier. Some philosophers use this thought experiment to challenge what it means to be conscious. Is your identity tied to your body, or is it tied purely to your mind, your memories, and your thoughts? If it's the latter, then your duplicate is just as much you as the original. That means, theoretically, the self isn't limited to one body. It could exist in multiple places at once. Mind blown. And here's the philosophical kicker. This isn't just abstract. It raises questions about mind uploading, AI, and futuristic tech. Imagine a day when humans can upload consciousness into computers. Suddenly, the brain duplication problem becomes urgent.
If you upload your mind to a digital world while your biological body continues living, which one is you? Both? Neither? Or both just branches of a single identity? Let's get a little practical. Think about memories you treasure, your childhood, your victories, your friendships. Now, imagine a copy of you that shares all of them but goes on a completely different path. That copy might succeed where you fail, or fail where you succeed. From its perspective, it is living your life, but from your perspective, it's separate. And yet it still contains everything that makes you you. It's like multiplying existence and challenging the very notion of uniqueness. And honestly, it's kind of beautiful in a terrifying way. The brain duplication problem forces us to confront that the self isn't as solid as we think. It's a story, a pattern of thoughts and experiences that could theoretically exist in more than one place at a time. And that makes you wonder, if identity is flexible like that, how much of you is tied to your body, your memories, or simply your perspective? So here's a question to leave you with. If someone made an exact copy of your brain right now, living a life you'll never experience, would that person be you? Would it matter if they are? And maybe, just maybe, that's a little glimpse into the mind-bending, reality-questioning world philosophers live in every day.
Mary's room. Knowledge argument. All right, let's dive into a classic philosophical thought experiment that will make you rethink what it really means to know something. It's called Mary's room, or the knowledge argument. And trust me, it's more than just a weird story about colors. Picture this. Mary is a brilliant scientist. She knows everything there is to know about color, how light waves work, how our eyes detect colors, the biology of vision, the physics of pigments, everything. Seriously, she's like the ultimate color expert. But there's a catch. Mary has spent her entire life in a black and white room. She's never seen a single color. Walls, books, even her clothes, everything is black, white, or shades of gray. Now, here is the twist. One day, Mary leaves the room and sees a red apple for the first time. Suddenly, she experiences red. And boom, philosophers ask, did she learn something new? She already knew all the facts about colors scientifically, but experiencing it firsthand, actually seeing red, gave her knowledge she didn't have before. This is mind-bending because it challenges the idea that all knowledge can be captured by facts. You can study everything about the world, but there are some things you only understand by experiencing them. Philosophers call this qualia, which is basically the subjective, first-person experience of sensations. It's the difference between reading a recipe for chocolate cake and actually tasting it. Big difference, right? Let's make it relatable. Imagine someone has never tried sushi, but they've read every book about sushi preparation, types of fish, and the culture around it. They could describe sushi perfectly, explain how it tastes, and even predict how it feels in the mouth. But until they actually eat it, they're missing the real experience. That's exactly what Mary's situation is about, but amped up to a cosmic level with color itself. And here's where it gets philosophical and a little weird. If Mary gains new knowledge just by seeing red, it suggests that experience adds something facts alone cannot provide. That means the world isn't just a collection of objective data. It's also shaped by how we perceive it.
Subjectivity matters, and that's huge. It's saying your brain can know all the science in the universe, but you won't really know something until you experience it. Now, some philosophers push back and say, oh, nah, Mary didn't learn anything new. She just recognized what she already knew. But most people intuitively feel like seeing red is something new. It's not about memorizing formulas or definitions. It's about feeling it. And that feeling matters. It makes life richer, more vibrant, more real. Think about your own life. Ever heard a song, read a book, or smelled something for the first time and thought, wow, I didn't know it could feel like this? That's Mary's room in action. No amount of reading or studying could give you that. Experience is its own kind of knowledge, and it's something that philosophers love to obsess over because it exposes the limits of what we think we know. So here's the kicker. Mary's room isn't just about color or brains or science. It's about reality. It asks us how much of our understanding comes from facts and how much comes from living and feeling those facts. And maybe it's a reminder that some of life's most important lessons aren't in textbooks. They're in the actual experience of being alive. So next time you see a sunset, taste a new food, or hear a song that hits you in the chest, think about Mary. You're stepping out of your own black and white room, discovering colors that no book or fact could ever fully capture. That's the magic of experience. And that's why philosophers love to blow our minds with Mary's room.
The trolley problem variance. All right, brace yourself, because this one will make your brain twist and turn in ways you didn't know were possible. You've probably heard of the trolley problem, right? That classic moral dilemma where a runaway trolley is heading toward 5 people tied to a track, and you can pull a lever to divert it onto another track, killing 1 person instead. Easy? Not so fast. Philosophers have turned this simple setup into dozens of mind-bending variants, and they are pure chaos for your sense of morality. Let's start with a basic twist. Imagine the same trolley, same 5 people, but this time, instead of a lever, you're standing on a bridge next to a very large person. The only way to stop the trolley is to push them onto the tracks, saving 5 but killing 1. Does it feel different? Probably. And that's exactly what philosophers want, to make you question why you feel differently in seemingly similar scenarios. Is it because of personal involvement, emotional response, or societal rules? The trolley problem variants reveal the hidden mechanics of your own moral brain. Now let's get really weird. Some philosophers introduce scenarios where people on the tracks are replaced with robots, aliens, or even clones of yourself. Suddenly, your moral calculations get messy. Do you care less if it's a robot? Does it make a difference if one of them is you in another universe? Some variants even ask you to consider probability. What if the lever diverts the trolley to a track where it might kill 10 people instead of 1, but only with a 50% chance? How do you weigh certainty versus risk? Your brain starts spinning. Here's a practical twist. Imagine this happening in real life. Not a runaway trolley, but a decision with massive consequences. Choosing between 2 job offers, deciding whether to intervene in an argument, even small parenting choices. Every decision has ripple effects, and the trolley problem variants are just philosophy's way of saying, hey, your choices aren't as simple as they seem. You start to see the complexity behind ethics,
empathy, and responsibility. And the beauty of these variants is how they expose moral intuitions. Most people instinctively want to save the most lives, but then recoil at directly harming someone, even for the greater good. Philosophers call this the clash between utilitarian thinking, maximizing total good, and deontological ethics, following moral rules. The trolley problem forces you to confront your gut reactions, your logic, and sometimes your deepest fears about right and wrong. Now here's a fun twist. Imagine AI taking these decisions for you. Self-driving cars have to make trolley-like choices every day. If your car is about to crash and has to choose between hitting 1 pedestrian or 5, what should it do? Philosophers argue endlessly about this because real-world consequences are terrifyingly complicated, and these trolley variants help us test our moral intuitions before things go wrong. So, the next time you hear about the trolley problem, remember, it's not just about trains. It's about life, decision-making, and the invisible rules that guide your gut reactions. Each variant is a mini experiment for your conscience. Do you act coldly, rational, or emotional human? And here's the kicker. No matter how many variants you consider, there's rarely a correct answer. That's what makes it endlessly fascinating and a little terrifying. Think about it. Your mind is constantly running tiny trolley problems every day, from choosing whom to text back first to deciding whether to speak up in a meeting. Philosophy just dresses it up with trains and lever dilemmas to make you notice. And maybe that's the point. Morality isn't neat, and sometimes the best you can do is wrestle with the questions.
The Chinese Room by Searle. All right, get ready, because this one will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about AI, robots, and even your smartphone. It's called The Chinese Room, proposed by philosopher John Searle. And it asks a deceptively simple question. Can a machine really understand anything, or is it just pretending? Here's the setup. Imagine a room. Inside the room is a person who doesn't know a word of Chinese. Outside the room, people pass in Chinese characters through a slot. The person inside has a giant instruction manual in their own language explaining exactly how to respond to the Chinese characters with other Chinese characters. They follow the instructions perfectly, producing replies that seem like they understand Chinese. From the outside, anyone looking in would think there's a fluent Chinese speaker inside. But here's the kicker. The person inside doesn't understand a word. They're just following rules. Searle's point? That's basically what a computer does. A computer can process information, follow rules, and even produce convincing responses. But does it really understand what it's doing? Or is it just manipulating symbols, like our person in the Chinese room? This idea raises deep questions about AI, consciousness, and what it really means to know something. Now, let's make it personal. Think about Siri, Alexa, or chatbots you talk to every day. They answer questions, crack jokes, and even offer advice. But do they understand you? According to Searle, probably not. They're incredibly sophisticated symbol manipulators, amazing at giving the appearance of understanding,
but the comprehension itself is absent. They're brilliant parrots of logic, not conscious thinkers. And it gets weirder when you consider future AI. Imagine a super intelligent AI that passes every Turing test ever conceived. It talks, reasons, even writes novels. Would it understand life, love, or death? Or would it just be an ultra-advanced version of the Chinese room, following rules and producing convincing output without any inner experience? Suddenly, questions about AI rights, ethics, and consciousness get really complicated. Here's a fun twist. Searle's thought experiment also makes us rethink human understanding. How do we know that anyone else truly understands anything, or if they're just incredibly convincing symbol manipulators? Of course, humans have subjective experiences that suggest real comprehension. But it's still a humbling reminder that understanding isn't always visible from the outside. Let's make it even more relatable. Imagine teaching a friend a joke in a language they don't speak. They memorize it perfectly, tell it flawlessly, and get laughs. But do they understand why it's funny? Not really. They're imitating, following instructions, but comprehension is missing. That's the Chinese room in a nutshell. And it's exactly what Searle wants us to think about when we marvel at AI. There's a huge difference between appearing intelligent and being intelligent. So here's the kicker. The Chinese room isn't saying AI can't be useful or impressive. It's saying we need to be careful about what we mean by understanding. Manipulating symbols isn't the same as experiencing meaning. Machines might simulate our minds perfectly, but does that simulation have inner life, awareness, or insight? That, according to Searle, is the million-dollar question. Next time you talk to a smart assistant or marvel at AI, remember the Chinese room. That impressive, human-like response. It might just be a super sophisticated parrot. Brilliant, yes, but not truly conscious. And the thought that something can seem to understand without actually understanding, that's philosophy messing with your head in the best way possible. Simulated reality hypothesis. All right, strap in, because this one will make you question everything you thought was real. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing none of this is real. Your friends, your coffee, your cat, even the sky above you, it's all part of a massive computer simulation. Sounds like sci-fi, right? But that's exactly what the simulated reality hypothesis suggests, and some philosophers and scientists take it seriously. The idea goes like this. If it's possible to simulate a universe with conscious beings inside it, and future civilizations are advanced enough to do so, then it's statistically likely that we are living in a simulation. Think about it. If there could be millions or billions of simulated realities, it becomes far more probable that we're inside one of them, rather than being part of the original base reality. Mind blown yet? Now let's make it personal.
Every time you see a glitchy video game character, a weird coincidence, or a dreamlike moment in life, ask yourself, could that be a bug in a simulation? Could déjà vu be the system trying to reload a memory or a small hiccup in the code of reality? Suddenly, life feels a little more like living inside a super advanced video game, and you're the main player. Here's where it gets philosophical and a little unsettling. If we are in a simulation, what does that say about morality, meaning, and purpose? Are our choices real, or are they just variables in a giant cosmic program? Do achievements and failures matter if someone or something is just running the universe like software? And yet, even if it's simulated, our experiences still feel real. Joy, pain, love, heartbreak, they're real to us, even if the universe is a program. That's the paradox. And scientists actually weigh in on this. Some argue that advanced civilizations might run ancestor simulations to study history or consciousness. That means our entire existence could be an experiment, a virtual reality scenario created by beings far beyond our comprehension. And yes, it's terrifying, but also kind of thrilling. Imagine the possibilities. The universe might be infinite, layered, and filled with levels we can't even imagine. Now, think about everyday life. Every social media post, every traffic jam, every surprise encounter, you might just be navigating the code of the simulation. And while it can feel strange, some philosophers argue that this hypothesis also makes life more precious. If reality is a simulation, our experiences, choices, and relationships are still meaningful to us. They still matter in the context of our consciousness, which is what really counts. Here's the fun mental exercise. Imagine if you could peek behind the curtain and see the code of the universe. What would you change? What patterns would you explore? Could you hack reality, or is that just part of the simulation's rules? Even thinking about it makes your brain feel like it's doing gymnastics, because the idea that everything might be a program challenges every assumption you've ever had about existence. So here's the kicker. Whether we're in a simulation or not, the question itself forces us to think deeply about reality, consciousness, and what it means to live a meaningful life. Maybe it's a simulation, maybe it's not. But either way, you get to play the main character, make decisions, and experience the universe as if it's real. And honestly, isn't that the most important part?
Anthropic principle. All right, let's get cosmic for a minute. Have you ever looked up at the night sky and thought, wow, why does the universe even allow me to exist? That's basically what the anthropic principle is all about. And trust me, it's a wild ride that makes you feel both tiny and incredibly special at the same time. Here's the gist. The anthropic principle says that the universe appears the way it does because we are here to observe it. Sounds simple, but the implications are mind-blowing. Basically, the universe isn't just a random soup of matter and energy. It seems fine-tuned for life, or at least for observers like us. If the constants of physics were slightly different, atoms wouldn't form, stars wouldn't shine, and life, well, it wouldn't exist. No you, no coffee, no late-night existential thoughts. Now, this is where it gets trippy. The anthropic principle suggests that the universe has to be compatible with conscious life, because if it weren't, there'd be no one around to notice it. It's like saying, of course the universe makes sense to us. It had to, or we wouldn't be here to wonder about it. Mind blown. Suddenly, existence feels like a very precise game of cosmic luck, or maybe something deeper. Let's make it personal. Every time you marvel at a sunrise, a rainbow, or even the fact that you're reading this right now, the anthropic principle is whispering, you exist in a universe that allows you to exist. That's kind of amazing, right? Out of all possible ways reality could have gone, here you are, experiencing it. Tiny probabilities, absolutely, but here you are. Here's another layer. Some philosophers and scientists take this principle further with the multiverse idea. Imagine infinite universes, each with different laws of physics. Most are barren, lifeless, or hostile to consciousness. But in the one we inhabit, everything just happens to line up perfectly so observers like us can exist. That doesn't mean we're special in a cosmic sense. It just means we notice the universe because only in this universe could we exist to notice it. And yes, it can get a little humbling. The anthropic principle challenges our assumptions about reality being purely random or just there. It also sparks debates about destiny, purpose, and whether the universe has some inherent direction, or if we're just lucky spectators in a vast cosmic lottery. Philosophers love it because it blurs the line between observation and reality. Think about your own life for a second. Every choice you make, every breath you take, every laugh, every tear, it's happening in a universe that, by chance or design, exists in a way that allows you to exist. That makes everything feel a little more fragile, a little more miraculous, and maybe even a little more meaningful. So here's the kicker. The anthropic principle isn't about proving we're the center of the universe. It's about realizing that reality, as weird and vast as it is, only makes sense because we are here to perceive it. Every star, every atom, every random event, all of it comes together to create the stage for conscious life. And the fact that we're here asking these questions is the universe reflecting on itself through us. Next time you gaze at the stars or feel overwhelmed by the sheer improbability of life, remember, the universe looks the way it does, in part because you are here to see it. That's both terrifying and incredibly beautiful.
The experience machine. Nozick. All right, get ready because this one is going to make you question every fun choice you've ever made. It's called the experience machine, and it's the ultimate thought experiment about pleasure, reality, and what actually matters in life. Imagine this. Scientists invent a machine that can give you any experience you want. The perfect vacation, winning the lottery, falling in love, mastering every skill you ever dreamed of. The catch? It's completely virtual. You plug in and your brain experiences everything as if it's real, but the moment you unplug, none of it actually happened in the real world. Here's the big question. Would you plug in? On the surface, it sounds amazing. Endless joy, zero pain, all your fantasies coming true. Who wouldn't want that? But Nozick, the philosopher who came up with this, says most people would hesitate. And that hesitation is exactly what makes this thought experiment so fascinating. Why? Because it turns out humans care about more than just pleasure. We want to live in reality. We want our achievements to actually matter. Winning the lottery in a machine doesn't feel the same as winning it in real life. Falling in love in a simulation isn't the same as sharing moments with a real person who can hurt or surprise you. Pleasure alone isn't enough. Existence, growth, and connection matter too. Now, think about everyday life. Sure, binge-watching your favorite show or scrolling social media feels good, but it's not the same as having actual experiences, right? The experience machine cranks this idea up to 11. It forces us to ask, would you sacrifice reality entirely for perfect pleasure? Most people say no, even though it's a tempting offer. That tells us something about what humans truly value: authenticity, meaning, and a sense of accomplishment. Here's another twist. Some argue, well, if the experience feels real, doesn't matter if it's fake? But Nozick's challenge pushes back. Life isn't just about feeling good. It's about being in the world, interacting with real people, and shaping actual events. The experience machine might give you endless joy, but it's a joy with no stakes, no growth, no legacy. It's sterile, even if it's exhilarating at the moment. And here's the kicker. This thought experiment isn't just theoretical. With VR, AI, and immersive simulations advancing rapidly, it's getting closer to reality. Imagine a future where you could fully live out your fantasies with zero consequences. No failure, no risk, no pain. Sounds perfect, right? But philosophers warn, the more we prioritize simulated pleasure over real life, the more we risk losing touch with what makes existence meaningful. So here's the takeaway. The experience machine makes us confront the uncomfortable truth that pleasure alone isn't the ultimate goal. Reality matters. Struggle matters. Relationships, growth, and risk, these are things you can't simulate fully, no matter how advanced the technology. And maybe that's why, deep down, most of us would step out of the machine and embrace real life, messy as it is. Next time you're tempted by an easy, perfect escape, whether it's scrolling endlessly online, fantasizing about a perfect life, or zoning out from responsibilities, remember the experience machine. True fulfillment comes from living, not just feeling. And that's a lesson your brain will never forget.
Infinite Monkey Theorem, philosophical version. All right, get ready for a brain bender that's equal parts math, philosophy, and absolute chaos. You've probably heard of the infinite monkey theorem in school. The idea that if you put a monkey in front of a typewriter and let it randomly hit keys forever, eventually it would type out Shakespeare's complete works. Wild, right? But philosophers have taken this one step further, and it gets seriously mind-blowing. Here's the twist. What if random processes could produce consciousness? That's right. Imagine the universe as a giant cosmic typewriter. Over infinite time, chaos, and randomness, every possible arrangement of particles could eventually occur. That means, in theory, the exact arrangement of atoms that makes you, your thoughts, memories, personality, could randomly appear out of nowhere.
A fully conscious you just popping into existence with no parents, no past, no history. Yeah, it's insane. Think about it. 1 second you're reading this, the next in a distant corner of a near infinite multiverse, there's a you sitting on a chair, sipping coffee, having the exact same thoughts as you. No connection, no explanation, just pure random emergence. Philosophers call these hypothetical entities Boltzmann brains, but the principle is similar to the infinite monkey theorem on a cosmic scale. Now, let's make it relatable. Imagine typing gibberish on your phone keyboard. By sheer randomness, you might accidentally write a sentence that makes perfect sense. The philosophical twist is, if the universe is vast enough, randomness could type not just sentences, but entire conscious beings. Life, thought, and experience might not need evolution or design. They could emerge from sheer improbability. Mind blown. And yes, this raises some seriously weird questions. If consciousness can randomly appear, how do we even know we're not one of these spontaneously formed minds? Could everything you think you know, every memory you cherish, just be a randomly generated copy with no actual past? It's a little terrifying, and yet fascinating, because it forces us to confront the fragility and improbability of existence. Here's the kicker. This thought experiment isn't just a weird math trick. It highlights the tension between probability, reality, and our understanding of consciousness. It asks, how much of our life is the product of causal history, and how much could, at least theoretically, emerge from sheer random chaos? And while we experience life as continuous and meaningful, the universe itself doesn't guarantee continuity. It just guarantees possibilities. So, next time you think about randomness, remember this. In an infinite cosmos, literally anything is possible. Not just monkeys typing Shakespeare, but entire conscious minds spontaneously arising, existing for a fleeting moment and maybe never knowing why. It's unsettling, absurd, and awe-inspiring at once. A perfect reminder that reality might be stranger than our brains can fully grasp. Paradox of the Ravens. All right, get ready, because this one is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about logic, science, and observation. It's called the Paradox of the Ravens, and at first glance, it sounds totally weird. But stick with me, it's mind-bending in the best way. Here's the setup. Suppose you have a hypothesis. All ravens are black. Easy enough, right? Normally, you'd try to confirm this by looking at a bunch of ravens and checking their color. If you see a black raven, cool, it supports your hypothesis. But here's where it gets strange. According to logic, anything that isn't a black raven also confirms your hypothesis. Wait, what? How does that even work? Let me break it down. The hypothesis, all ravens are black, is the same as saying everything that is not black is not a raven. So, if you see a red apple, that's technically evidence supporting the idea that all ravens are black. because the apple isn't a raven and therefore doesn't contradict the rule. Mind blown. You just confirmed something about ravens by looking at a completely unrelated fruit. Philosophy is wild. Now, let's make it more relatable. Imagine you're trying to prove that all cats like sleeping in the sun. If you see a cat basking in sunlight, that makes sense. But now, imagine seeing a dog curled up in the shade. According to this paradox, that also counts as evidence that all cats like sunbathing, because the dog isn't a cat, so it doesn't disprove your statement. Your brain might scream, "That makes no sense!" And that's exactly what philosophers love about it. It challenges our intuitions about evidence and confirmation. Here's the kicker. The paradox of the ravens isn't just an abstract game. It actually matters in science and reasoning. Sometimes evidence can come from unexpected places. Observing things that aren't directly related to your hypothesis can still shape your confidence in it. It's a reminder that logic and intuition don't always line up, and that the universe can be sneakily consistent in ways we don't immediately notice. Think about your daily life. Every time you test a theory, like whether a new recipe works or whether your friend is always late, you're doing a little informal version of this paradox. Sometimes the most convincing evidence comes from something totally unexpected. That's the hidden genius of logic. It sneaks in lessons where you least expect them. So next time you see something completely unrelated, a blue notebook, a passing stranger, a leaf falling from a tree, remember the paradox of the ravens. You might just be confirming truths without even realizing it. Reality has a funny way of surprising you. And philosophy is there to point out the weird little shortcuts logic can take. It's strange, counterintuitive, and perfect for making your brain feel delightfully tangled.
The liar paradox. All right, get ready, because this one is a brain twister that will make you question reality, truth, and even the words coming out of your own mouth. It's called the liar paradox, and it's deceptively simple. The classic example, the statement, "This statement is false." Yep, that's it. Short, sweet, and utterly confusing. Here's why it's so mind-bending. Let's say the statement is true. If it's true, then what it says must hold, so it must be false. But if it's false, then what it claims isn't true, which would mean it's actually true. See the problem? You're stuck in an endless loop where the statement can't consistently be either true or false. Your brain might be screaming, "Just pick one," but logic isn't letting you. That's the paradox. Now, let's make it a little more fun. Imagine a friend tells you, "I always lie." If they're telling the truth, then they must be lying. But if they're lying, then sometimes they tell the truth. Suddenly, every conversation with them becomes a mind game. That's exactly what the liar paradox does. It shows us that truth isn't always straightforward, and some statements exist entirely outside normal logic. And here's where it gets philosophical and a bit unsettling. The liar paradox isn't just a quirky language trick. It challenges the foundation of truth, reasoning, and self-reference. When a statement refers to itself, it can break the usual rules of logic. Philosophers, mathematicians, and computer scientists have wrestled with it for centuries because it hints at the limits of our systems for understanding truth. Let's take it even further. The paradox also pops up in modern technology and AI.
Self-referential statements in computer programs can create infinite loops or crashes, which is basically a digital version of the liar paradox. Even in philosophy, it's used to explore the limits of knowledge, language, and what it means for a statement or a thought to be true. Here's a fun everyday twist. Think about moments when your brain doubts itself, like trying to remember if you locked the door or if you really sent that text. Your own thoughts sometimes loop in on themselves, and suddenly certainty feels impossible. That's the liar paradox in miniature. Logic and self-reference colliding in ways that feel impossible to resolve. So, here's the kicker. The liar paradox reminds us that some questions don't have neat answers. Truth can be slippery, especially when language loops back on itself. It's frustrating, fascinating, and utterly human. And honestly, that's part of the fun of philosophy. It takes something that seems simple, like a single sentence, and uses it to blow your mind. Next time you hear a statement that makes you pause, twist your brain, or question reality, think of the liar paradox. It's short, it's strange, and it proves that even a tiny sentence can hide an infinite puzzle. Non-overlapping magisteria, or NOMA for short. All right, let's take a step back from paradoxes and mind-bending thought experiments and dive into something that touches on a topic everyone thinks they have an opinion about: science and religion. The idea we're exploring is called non-overlapping magisteria, or NOMA for short. And no, it's not a spell from Harry Potter. It's a philosophical framework for thinking about how science and religion can coexist without constantly fighting over everything. Here's the gist. NOMA says that science and religion each have their own magisterium, their own domain of authority. Science answers questions about the natural world. How do stars form? What causes disease? How does gravity work? Religion, on the other hand, deals with questions of meaning, morality, and purpose. Why are we here? How should we live? What happens after death? According to NOMA, these domains don't overlap, so ideally they shouldn't contradict each other because they're asking completely different questions. Sounds neat in theory, right? But here's the catch. Humans love to make things messy. People often try to get science to answer spiritual questions or push religion to make predictions about the physical world. That's when conflicts arise. NOMA basically says, chill out. Science has its territory. Religion has its territory. And if everyone sticks to their own lane, life might be a lot less stressful. Let's make it personal. Think about your own life. When you ask, how do I fix this problem? You might turn to science, logic, or evidence. But when you ask, what gives my life meaning? You're stepping into territory science can't touch. NOMA reminds us that asking the right questions to the right framework matters. Trying to mix them can lead to frustration, endless debates, or worse, people yelling on the internet. Here's the philosophical beauty. NOMA encourages humility. It's basically saying, you can't have all the answers, and that's okay. Science isn't meant to explain why life feels meaningful, and religion isn't meant to tell you the exact mass of a neutron. Each has its own role, and each is important in its own way. And acknowledging this separation can reduce conflicts, not just in academia, but in everyday life. Of course, critics argue that some questions do overlap, like whether the universe had a beginning or how morality connects to human nature. But NOMA serves as a useful mental tool. It helps us recognize when debates are productive and when they're just people talking past each other. It's a way of saying maybe some questions require different tools to answer, and that's perfectly okay. So here's the kicker. NOMA isn't about forcing agreement. It's about respecting the different ways humans try to understand their world. Science gives us knowledge about the universe's mechanics. Religion, philosophy, or spirituality gives us insight into life's meaning. Neither is wrong, but neither can fully answer the other's questions. And maybe, just maybe, accepting that can make life a little less confusing and a lot more peaceful. Next time someone argues over whether evolution contradicts spirituality, think about NOMA. It's a reminder that the universe and our experience of it is bigger than any single domain of knowledge. And sometimes the best answer is knowing which questions belong to which magisterium.
Hyper-Reality by Baudrillard. All right, get ready, because this one will make you look at your Instagram feed and question everything you thought was real. It's called hyper-reality, a concept from the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard. And it's basically about how reality itself can get replaced by symbols, signs, and simulations. Sounds confusing? Don't worry, we'll break it down. Here's the idea. In hyper-reality, the line between reality and representation gets blurry. Think about Disneyland. You know, the perfectly curated, ideal version of reality. Princesses, castles, and magical streets. It's not real life. It's a simulation of real life. And the crazy thing? For many people, it feels more real than real life. This is hyper-reality in action. The simulation becomes more meaningful, more compelling than actual reality. Now, let's make it personal. Scroll through social media for a minute. Every influencer, every perfectly staged coffee cup, every sunset photo, it's not just a snapshot of reality. It's a crafted symbol meant to represent a lifestyle, an idea, a feeling. Sometimes these symbols start to replace the real thing in our minds. The vacation you see on Instagram might look amazing, but the real experience could be messy, boring, or imperfect. Hyper-reality tricks your brain into caring more about the symbol than the reality. And it's not just about social media. Think about advertising, movies, even news media. We often engage with representations of life rather than life itself. Logos, brands, and symbols start to stand in for meaning, relationships, or identity. A logo isn't just a logo anymore. It's a lifestyle, a promise, or a status. The symbol overtakes the reality it's supposed to represent, and suddenly, our world is a map of signs rather than the territory itself. Here's where it gets philosophical and a little unsettling. Hyperreality challenges the idea that we can ever experience pure reality in modern life. Everything is filtered, mediated, or interpreted through a symbol system. It's not lying. It's just that the representation becomes more important than the thing itself. Your brain starts living in the map instead of the territory. And once that happens, it's hard to tell what's authentic. Baudrillard even took it further with extreme examples, like media coverage of disasters or wars. People might experience them more through images, hashtags, and stories than the events themselves. The simulation shapes their perception and emotional response more than reality ever could. That's hyperreality at its peak. The world isn't just reported, it's reconstructed in a way that can feel more real than the real thing. So here's the kicker. Hyperreality isn't just philosophy. It's everywhere. And it affects how we live, feel, and think. Our reality is layered with signs, simulations, and symbols, and sometimes we forget the original reality they're pointing to. It's both fascinating and a little creepy, like discovering the universe is a movie set, and you're both the audience and the actor. Next time you scroll through feeds, watch movies, or follow trends, think about hyperreality. Are you experiencing life, or are you experiencing the symbol of life? That's the question Baudrillard wants you to wrestle with, and once you notice it, you'll never see reality the same way again.
The shipwrecked sailor paradox. All right, let's set sail into one of the loneliest thought experiments in philosophy. It's called the shipwrecked sailor paradox, and it asks a question that will make you stare at the ceiling at night. Does morality exist if there's literally no one else around to witness it? Here's the scenario. Imagine you're a sailor, stranded alone on a deserted island. No other humans, no society, no laws, just you, coconuts, and endless ocean. Now, a moral question pops up. Should you do what's right, or just whatever benefits you? Without anyone else around, who would know if you lied, stole, or acted selfishly? Would good and bad even mean anything in isolation? At first glance, you might think, well, morality doesn't matter if I'm alone. I can do whatever I want. But philosophers dig deeper. They ask, is morality objective, existing independently of observers, or is it social, emerging only when people interact? In the sailor's case, if morality is social, then there's literally no ethical framework. Your actions have no moral weight. But if it's objective, some choices could still be right or wrong, even if you're the only person on Earth. Now let's make it relatable. Think about moments when you're alone, like late at night, deciding whether to be lazy, eat that extra slice of cake, or binge-watch TV instead of doing work. Part of you still feels moral pressure, even with no one watching. That's the paradox in miniature. Does morality come from society, or is it something ingrained in our consciousness, something we carry even when we're alone? And here's where it gets tricky. Some argue that morality requires others. Acts like kindness, honesty, or fairness only exist because they affect others.
If there are no others, moral behavior might just reduce to self-interest, survival, or habit. But others claim morality is intrinsic, that doing the right thing has value in itself, independent of anyone noticing. The shipwrecked sailor forces us to wrestle with this tension. Here's a fun thought twist. Imagine the sailor discovers another conscious being, like an animal with some awareness. Does that bring morality back into play? Some philosophers say yes. Morality emerges whenever there's a conscious observer to be affected. Others argue no. Full moral obligations only exist among beings with similar moral reasoning. So here's the kicker. The shipwrecked sailor paradox isn't just about islands or survival. It's a mirror for everyday life. How much of your moral behavior is about your own conscience versus how others perceive you? Would you still act good if no one ever knew? And what does that say about the nature of ethics itself? Are right and wrong universal truths, or just social conventions we internalize? Next time you're alone, making a choice nobody will ever see, think of the shipwrecked sailor. Philosophy is asking you, where no one else is watching, who or what are you really accountable to? And honestly, that question can be more unsettling than any desert island.
Time loop ethics. All right, buckle up, because this one will make you feel like you're stuck in a movie, and not the fun kind where you get endless snacks. This is called time loop ethics, and it asks a wild question. How do moral decisions work if history repeats endlessly? Imagine this. You wake up and everything around you is exactly the same as yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. You're in a time loop, like in Groundhog Day or Edge of Tomorrow, except there's no reset button you can press. History just keeps repeating. Now you're faced with moral decisions. You can lie, cheat, steal, help someone, or even save the world. But here's the kicker. Everything repeats. Your actions have no lasting consequence beyond the loop. So the question arises, does morality even matter? If your choices are wiped out when the day resets, should you bother acting ethically at all? Some would say, why not do whatever you want? No consequences, no harm. But philosophers argue that morality isn't just about consequences. It's also about who you are as a person. Even in a loop, choosing kindness, honesty, or courage shapes your character and your experience of reality, even if the timeline resets. Now, let's make it relatable. Think about routines in your own life. Days that feel like they repeat endlessly, like commuting to work or scrolling the same feeds. You might feel trapped or disconnected. Time loop ethics asks, even if your actions seem meaningless, is there value in making the right choices anyway? Can morality exist as an internal compass rather than something imposed by external consequences? And here's where it gets really tricky. Some philosophers suggest that a time loop intensifies moral responsibility. Why? Because if you're the only one who remembers previous loops, your choices carry the weight of knowledge that no one else has. You become a kind of moral experimenter, testing what it means to act ethically without relying on outcomes or social approval. Every decision becomes pure ethics, stripped of reward or punishment. Here's a fun thought experiment. Imagine you have infinite loops, infinite chances to do good or bad. Would you eventually become perfectly moral? Or would boredom, frustration, or cynicism creep in? Time loop ethics isn't just about philosophy. It's about psychology, character, and what motivates humans to act ethically when nothing external enforces it. So here's the kicker. Time loop ethics forces us to confront a profound question. Is morality about results, or is it about who we are in the moment? Even if history repeats endlessly, the act of choosing rightly still matters because it shapes your consciousness, your sense of self, and maybe, just maybe, the way you experience existence. Next time you feel stuck in a repetitive cycle, whether it's a mundane routine or a challenging moral dilemma, think about time loop ethics. Even if everything resets, your choices define you. And sometimes that's the only kind of permanence that really counts.
Mind-body dualism. All right, let's dive into one of the oldest and still one of the weirdest questions in philosophy: mind-body dualism. This is the idea that your mind and your body are two separate things, like software and hardware. Your body is the machine, the physical part you can touch, see, and measure. Your mind, or consciousness, is something totally different. It thinks, feels, dreams, and maybe even survives when the body stops. Now, here's the crazy part. If the mind and body are separate, how do they interact? When you decide to lift your hand, how does a non-physical mind send the command to a physical body? How does something invisible produce movement, speech, or even a heartbeat? Philosophers have been scratching their heads over this for centuries. It's like trying to figure out how Wi-Fi signals can move furniture. Sounds impossible, but somehow it happens, at least in theory. Let's make it relatable. Think about when you're angry and your heart races, or when you're scared and your stomach knots up. Your mind is sending signals, or maybe your body is reacting independently. But either way, something is coordinating between these two realms. Dualism says these aren't just chemical reactions. They're evidence of a separate, non-physical consciousness interacting with the physical body. Trippy, right? Now, some philosophers push this even further. René Descartes, the famous dualist, suggested that the pineal gland might be the meeting point between mind and body. Modern science hasn't really confirmed that, but it shows how seriously people have taken the question, where exactly does thought meet matter? And if the mind can exist separately, could consciousness survive bodily death? That's the spooky part that makes this more than just a mental exercise. It edges into questions about the soul, afterlife, and immortality. Here's a fun thought twist. What if your mind could be copied into a machine? Would that machine be you? Dualism suggests yes, the mind is distinct from the body. So theoretically, it could exist without your biological hardware. That's a concept that feeds directly into discussions about mind uploading, AI, and even digital immortality. Suddenly, Star Trek-level ideas aren't so far-fetched. And yet,
Critics argue that dualism has huge problems. If the mind is non-physical, how does it obey physical laws? How can something immaterial affect matter without breaking physics? This is called the interaction problem, and is why many philosophers today lean toward physicalism, the idea that consciousness arises entirely from the brain. But dualism still fascinates because it keeps the door open for something beyond the material world. So here's the kicker. Mind-body dualism isn't just a philosophy thought experiment. It's a mirror for how we think about ourselves. Are you just a bunch of neurons firing, or is there an extra part of you, a consciousness that transcends the body? And if the latter is true, what does that mean for identity, free will, and even life after death? Next time you catch yourself lost in thought, daydreaming, or feeling your emotions bubble up in strange ways, think about dualism. That invisible part of you might be more real than you think, or at least more mysterious.
P-zombies, or philosophical zombies. All right, get ready, because this one is going to make you question whether everyone around you is actually conscious. Welcome to the strange world of P-zombies, or philosophical zombies. No, these aren't the slow, brain-eating monsters from movies. They're something far weirder and more unsettling. Here's the idea. Imagine a being that looks, talks, and behaves exactly like a human. It eats pizza, laughs at jokes, cries at sad movies, and even argues about philosophy. But here's the catch. It has no inner experience, no awareness, no feeling, no what it's like to be it. It's physically identical to a human, but there's literally no consciousness inside. Everything it does is just mechanical, like an extremely convincing robot. Now let's make it relatable. Think about your best friend, your sibling, or even yourself. Every thought, every emotion, every sensation you feel is part of your conscious experience. But if P-zombies are possible, someone could act exactly like you without actually feeling any of it. They'd smile when they're happy, cry when they're sad, but on the inside, nothing. Nada. Mind blown. Philosophers use P-zombies to ask a huge question. Is consciousness reducible to physical processes? Or is there something more? If it's possible to have a being that's physically identical to a human, but lacks consciousness, then consciousness must be more than just matter and neurons firing. It points to something special, something fundamentally non-physical about the mind. Here's a fun thought twist. Imagine walking through a crowd and wondering who's real and who's a P-zombie. Every human interaction you have could, in theory, be with a perfectly conscious person or with a being that just mimics consciousness flawlessly. Creepy, right? Philosophers aren't suggesting this happens in reality, but it's a powerful tool for understanding what consciousness really is. And yes, it gets even more mind-bending. Some argue that if P-zombies are conceivable, it challenges physicalism, the idea that everything about the mind can be explained by physics alone. It forces us to ask, why do we feel anything at all? Why is there something it is like to experience life? P-zombies highlight the mystery that science still hasn't fully solved. So here's the kicker. P-zombies make consciousness feel both miraculous and fragile. Your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, what makes you, might not be explainable just by looking at your body. And that's both terrifying and amazing, because it means there's more to being alive than just existing physically. Next time you see someone smile, laugh, or cry, take a moment to appreciate it. Unlike a P-zombie, they're really there, experiencing life in a way that can't be faked or replicated by physics alone. And that, my friend, is the strange wonder of consciousness.
The problem of other minds. All right, get ready because this one is going to make you look at everyone around you a little differently. It's called the problem of other minds, and it asks a deceptively simple but terrifying question. How can you know anyone else is actually conscious? Think about it. You know your own thoughts, feelings, and experiences. You have direct access to them. You feel joy, pain, love, and frustration every day. But everyone else, you only see their behavior. They smile, laugh, cry, or scream. But how do you know there's actually a conscious mind behind it? Could they just be acting like they feel something? Like incredibly advanced robots or actors in a play? Philosophers call this the ultimate other minds problem. Now let's make it personal. Imagine your best friend laughs at a joke. You assume they're actually amused, right? But strictly speaking, you can't experience their laughter the way they do. You infer it from external cues, facial expressions, tone of voice, body language. That's how we navigate social life, but at its core, it's an educated guess, not a guaranteed truth. Mind-bending, right? Here's where it gets even trickier. Some philosophers, like solipsists, take this further and argue maybe no one else is conscious at all. Maybe the universe is just you and everyone else is a projection of your own mind. Terrifying, lonely, and fascinating all at once. Of course, most of us reject this idea because it's impractical. But it highlights the difficulty of truly knowing what's going on in another person's head. And here's a fun twist. This problem also applies to AI. Let's say you're talking to a chatbot or a robot that mimics emotions perfectly. You see a smile, a witty response, maybe even simulated empathy. But is there real consciousness behind it? How could you ever know? The problem of other minds isn't just philosophical. It's becoming a question for the future of technology. So why does this matter? Because it shapes how we relate to others. Every act of trust, empathy, or morality assumes that other minds exist. When you comfort a friend, argue with a colleague, or teach a student, you're assuming that your actions reach a conscious mind that can feel and respond. The entire fabric of social life depends on this assumption, even if we can never know it with absolute certainty. Here's the kicker. The problem of other minds is humbling. It reminds us that consciousness is deeply mysterious and that our connection to other beings is built on trust, inference, and shared experience rather than certainty. Every human interaction is a leap of faith that there's someone in there experiencing the world as vividly as you are. Next time you smile at someone, argue, or share a story,
think about the problem of other minds. You're interacting with a mystery, a mind that may be fully conscious, fully aware, and completely separate from you. And that makes every connection we have just a little more miraculous.
Transhumanist identity theory. All right, strap in because this one takes us straight into the future. It's called transhumanist identity theory, and it asks a question that sounds like science fiction, but philosophers take it dead seriously. If you upload your mind to a computer, is that still you? Imagine this. It's 2075, and technology can scan every neuron in your brain, map all your memories, personality quirks, and thought patterns, and transfer them into a digital system. Boom! You're now a software version of yourself. You can interact in virtual worlds, make decisions, and even live forever in the cloud. But here's the big philosophical question. Is that really you, or just a copy of you? Let's make it relatable. Think about the memories, habits, and quirks that make you, you. Are they just information that can be duplicated? Or is there something about the original you, your consciousness, your subjective experience, that can't be transferred? If the copy behaves exactly like you, remembers everything you do, and feels emotions the same way, does it matter if it's a replica? That's the question transhumanist identity theory wrestles with. Now here's a twist. Some philosophers argue that uploading your mind doesn't preserve identity, it creates a new consciousness. You, the original, still exist in your biological body. The digital version is you in every observable way, but it's a separate being. If that's true, immortality isn't really achieved, it's just a duplicate that thinks it's you. That's a little unsettling, right? Your digital twin could go off living your life while the original you still ages normally. On the flip side, some argue that identity is defined by continuity of information and experience. If the digital mind perfectly preserves all your thoughts and memories, maybe it is you. In that view, consciousness isn't tied to meat and neurons. It's a pattern, and patterns can be transferred. Uploading your mind becomes a modern version of reincarnation, just with Wi-Fi. And yes, this opens up a ton of ethical and philosophical problems. Should digital copies have rights? Could you delete your mind safely without moral consequences? If you make multiple copies, which one is real? Transhumanist identity theory forces us to confront the boundaries between self, consciousness, and technology, boundaries we've never faced before. Here's the kicker. This thought experiment isn't just about futuristic tech. It asks a timeless question. What makes you, you? Is it your body, your memories, your choices, or some ineffable spark of consciousness? And if we can replicate that spark, what does it mean for life, death, and morality? Next time you daydream about uploading your mind or living forever digitally, think about transhumanist identity theory. It's thrilling,
unsettling, and completely mind-bending. A perfect reminder that identity is far stranger than we usually imagine.
The Simulation Argument by Bostrom. All right, get ready, because this one will make you look around your room and question if any of it is real. It's called the Simulation Argument, proposed by philosopher Nick Bostrom. And it basically says, statistically, there's a good chance we're living in a computer simulation. Yep, your life might just be pixels and code. Here's the logic. Bostrom starts with 3 possibilities. 1, civilizations almost never reach the point where they can run simulations of entire worlds. 2, civilizations that do reach that point almost never run many simulations. And 3, if civilizations do run a ton of simulations, the simulated beings vastly outnumber the original real beings. If the third option is true, the argument goes, it's statistically likely that we're part of the simulated population rather than the original reality. Now, let's make it relatable. Think about video games, VR, and AI. In a few decades or centuries, advanced civilizations could theoretically simulate universes with conscious inhabitants. If they do that, the simulated worlds could be indistinguishable from reality for those inside them. And here we are, looking around, thinking this is real, while it might all just be sophisticated code running somewhere else. Trippy, right? Here's where it gets philosophical. If we're living in a simulation, what does that mean for free will, morality, or purpose? Are our choices truly ours, or are they part of a program designed by someone or something else? Could glitches in reality hint at the programming errors of our universe? Suddenly, déjà vu, déjà entendu, and weird coincidences get a whole new meaning. And yes, the simulation argument is partly statistical, partly speculative, and partly existential. We can't prove we're in a simulation, but we also can't rule it out. It's a reminder that reality might be stranger than we think, and that the boundaries between real and virtual could be completely blurred. Philosophers love this idea because it forces us to rethink everything we take for granted. Here's the kicker. Even if we never know for sure, thinking about the simulation argument is fun and humbling. It makes every decision feel simultaneously trivial and monumental. After all, if we're in a simulation, maybe our choices are the way we interact with the code. And maybe, just maybe, we're the programmers in disguise. Next time you pause, staring at a sunset, your morning coffee, or even a computer screen, think about the simulation argument. Could all of this just be part of a massive cosmic VR game? And if so, does it make life less meaningful or just way more fascinating?
Modal realism, David Lewis. All right, get ready, because this one will blow your mind in a way that makes the multiverse sound not just possible, but inevitable. It's called modal realism, a theory proposed by philosopher David Lewis, and it asks a wild question.
What if every possible world actually exists? Not just as ideas or imagination, but as real, concrete realities, just like ours. Here's the idea. Think about all the choices you've ever made, or could have made. Every decision, every action, every what-if scenario spins off into a separate universe. In one world, you chose cereal for breakfast. In another, toast. In one world, you moved to a different city. In another, you stayed. According to modal realism, all of those worlds are equally real, running simultaneously, completely independent of each other. Now, let's make it relatable. Think about that moment when you wonder, what if I'd said yes instead of no? Modal realism says, you did. In some world, that version of you is living that exact path. Every regret, every fantasy, every tiny change creates a branching universe where a version of you exists. It's like an infinite choose-your-own-adventure story, but all of the stories are actually happening somewhere. Here's where it gets philosophical and a little dizzying. If all possible worlds exist, then every outcome you can imagine isn't just a possibility, it's a certainty somewhere in the multiverse. That means that for literally everything you can think of, there's a world where it happens. You win the lottery in one universe, spill coffee on your shirt in another, and maybe even become president in a third. Every what could be is what is somewhere in the multiverse. And yes, modal realism has mind-bending implications for identity and responsibility. If there are infinite versions of you, what does it mean to say, I did this, or I am this person? And if every moral choice is enacted in some world, does that change how we think about ethics? It's weird, counterintuitive, and perfect for making your brain feel both powerful and tiny at the same time. Here's the kicker. Modal realism isn't just a thought experiment. It's a lens to see possibility and reality in a completely new way. It suggests that the universe, or rather the multiverse, is far stranger than we usually imagine. Every decision you make doesn't just affect your life. Somewhere, in some reality, every other version of you is living out every alternative. Next time you catch yourself wondering what if, think about modal realism. Somewhere out there, another person is already experiencing it, and that makes life feel infinitely bigger, infinitely stranger, and infinitely more fascinating than you ever imagined.
The infinite regress of justification. All right, let's dive into one of the most frustrating and strangely addictive puzzles in philosophy, the infinite regress of justification. Imagine trying to justify every belief you hold. The question it raises is simple. Why should we believe what we believe? But here's the kicker. It never stops. Think about it like this. You believe something, say that the sun will rise tomorrow. Why do you believe it? Maybe because it always has. Okay, but why should that be convincing? Maybe because past patterns suggest future patterns. Fine. Why do you trust patterns? Because humans observe and learn from the world. And then, boom, you realize every reason you give leads to another question. Why trust that reason? And why trust the reason for that reason? Philosophers call this an infinite regress, a never-ending chain of why questions. Now, let's make it personal.
Ever argued with a friend only to go in circles trying to explain why something is true? Because it's obvious. Why is it obvious? Because... And then you crash into the wall of reasoning that has no end. That's the infinite regress of justification in real life. It's like asking for a foundation under every brick in a building that keeps growing taller. Here's where it gets philosophical. The regress problem challenges certainty. If every belief requires justification, can we ever truly know anything? How do we escape endless questioning? Philosophers have proposed 3 solutions. First, foundationalism, where some beliefs are basic and self-evident, needing no further justification. Second, coherentism, where beliefs support each other in a web rather than a linear chain. And third, infinitism, which says maybe the chain really is infinite, and that's okay. Each approach is weirdly satisfying and deeply unsettling at the same time. And yes, the regress isn't just about abstract philosophy. It sneaks into everyday life. Think about moral decisions, political beliefs, or even common sense. Every choice you justify can trigger another why, and another, and another. You start questioning your reasoning, your assumptions, and sometimes even reality itself. It's exhausting, but also fascinating, because it exposes just how complex thinking really is. Here's the kicker. The infinite regress of justification reminds us that certainty is rare, and questioning is endless. Life is full of beliefs built on other beliefs, and sometimes the fun is in the journey, not the answer. Each why is a chance to dig deeper, see the world differently, and maybe even enjoy the infinite puzzle of reasoning itself. Next time you find yourself questioning everything, think about the infinite regress of justification. Your brain might feel dizzy, but that dizzy feeling, that's philosophy doing its job, making life a little more complicated and a lot more interesting.
The problem is, yet, it makes you look at your everyday assumptions, and maybe even your morning coffee, differently. Here's the core idea. Just because something happened in the past doesn't guarantee it will happen in the future. Sounds obvious? Stick with me. Every day, we assume the future will resemble the past. The sun rises, gravity works, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. We expect these things because they always have. But Hume points out a tricky truth. This expectation is based purely on habit, not certainty. There's no logical reason why the future must follow the past. Now, let's make it relatable. Imagine walking to work. You assume your path is safe because it's always been safe. But Hume would ask, what if tomorrow a giant sinkhole appears or a UFO abducts you mid-street? The point isn't that these things will happen. It's that your confidence in the future is never 100% justified by past experience. Every prediction you make, no matter how mundane, is technically an assumption. Here's where it gets even deeper. Science itself relies on induction. Experiments assume that natural laws remain consistent over time, but strictly speaking, Hume tells us, this assumption isn't logically guaranteed. Even the laws of physics could change tomorrow, and all our reasoning would fail.
That's why induction is powerful, yet philosophically shaky. It works in practice, but not in absolute certainty. And here's a fun twist. The problem of induction doesn't just shake physics. It shakes everyday reasoning. Your confidence in friendships, habits, routines, and even trust in people is based on past patterns. Yet nothing in principle guarantees that those patterns will continue. Every expectation is built on a foundation of probably, but maybe not. So here's the kicker. The problem of induction forces us to confront uncertainty in a profound way. Life is predictable, yes, but only to the extent that patterns hold. There's always a sliver of the unknown, a chance that the unexpected could crash in. Philosophically, it's humbling. Practically, it reminds us to think critically, stay flexible, and maybe not take anything for granted, even the sunrise. Next time you brush your teeth, pour coffee, or step out the door, think about him. You're participating in a grand game of probability, not absolute certainty. And that uncertainty is part of what makes life endlessly fascinating.
The paradox of hedonism. All right, let's talk about something that might hit a little too close to home for all of us. The paradox of hedonism. It's basically a fancy way of saying that if you chase pleasure too hard, you might never actually feel it. Yeah, life can be cruelly ironic. Here's the idea. Imagine someone spends their entire life trying to be happy, maximizing pleasure, avoiding discomfort, constantly seeking fun experiences. You'd think they'd end up blissed out, right? Well, the paradox says, not necessarily. Pleasure is tricky. The more you focus on it directly, the more it slips through your fingers. Happiness often comes when you're not thinking about it at all, when you're engaged in something meaningful, challenging, or even a little painful. Now, let's make it relatable. Think about trying to have a perfect day. You plan every second, aim for maximum enjoyment, and track your happiness like it's a scoreboard. Ironically, that obsession can make the day feel forced, stressful, or even empty. Meanwhile, the moments where you simply go with the flow, helping a friend, learning something new, or laughing at a silly accident, often feel far more pleasurable. That's the paradox in action. Philosophers call this the hedonistic trap. Pleasure isn't just a commodity you can pursue directly. It's a byproduct of engagement, purpose, or even letting go of the need to feel good. The more you chase it as an end in itself, the more elusive it becomes. Happiness isn't a goal you grab. It's a shadow that follows you when you focus elsewhere. And here's a fun twist. This paradox shows up everywhere, from relationships to hobbies to social media. Think about scrolling for likes or chasing perfect experiences. Sometimes the more you focus on being happy, the more anxious or unsatisfied you feel. It's a reminder that pleasure is sneaky. You can't demand it, you have to invite it by living well, authentically, and fully. So here's the kicker. The paradox of hedonism isn't about avoiding pleasure. It's about realizing that pleasure often comes when you're not trying too hard. Ironically, happiness is often found by living in the moment, pursuing meaning, or even embracing challenges, rather than obsessively chasing the good life. Next time you feel like life is a constant quest for fun or comfort, think about this paradox. Sometimes the best way to be happy is to stop trying so hard and just let it happen naturally. Irony, life lessons, and philosophy all rolled into one.
The Sorite's paradox. All right, get ready, because this one's going to make you question something you probably never thought about. What actually counts as a heap? Welcome to the Sorite's paradox, also known as the paradox of the heap. It's simple to state, but surprisingly mind-bending. Here's the setup. Imagine you have a big pile of sand, a beautiful, perfect heap. Now, you remove one grain of sand. Is it still a heap? Of course, you think. It's only one grain gone. Remove another grain. Still a heap, right? And another, and another, and another. At what exact point does it stop being a heap? 1 grain? 10 grains? 1,000? The paradox shows that vague concepts like heap don't have clear boundaries, and trying to define them can drive your brain crazy. Now let's make it relatable. Think about everyday situations where you deal with vagueness. When is someone considered tall? How many minutes count as late? At what point does clutter become hoarding? The Sorite's paradox highlights that many of our everyday categories are fuzzy, and small changes can create big conceptual problems if we demand precise definitions. Philosophers love this paradox because it exposes a fundamental tension between common sense and logic. In everyday life, we're fine with saying, "That's a heap, that's not a heap." But when you try to formalize it, logic trips over itself. Removing 1 grain at a time seems harmless, but repeated enough, the heap disappears, and the paradox shows how vague predicates can lead to contradictions. And here's a fun twist. The Sorite's paradox isn't just about sand. It sneaks into law, ethics, and science. Consider pollution regulations. How many particles make contamination? Or medicine? At what exact point is a symptom serious? Vague boundaries create real-world dilemmas, and the paradox forces us to confront them. So here's the kicker. The Sorite's paradox teaches us that precision isn't always possible, and some concepts are inherently slippery. Life is full of thresholds we can't pin down perfectly. Heaps, tallness, morality, or even happiness. Philosophy loves these puzzles because they make us aware of the fuzzy edges of our thinking. Next time you look at a pile of sand or even a messy desk, think about the Sorite's paradox. 1 grain, 1 decision, 1 tiny change. Suddenly, your brain is questioning everything you thought was simple. And that's the strange, wonderful power of philosophy. The bootstrap paradox. All right, hold on tight. This one will twist your brain like a pretzel. The bootstrap paradox is a time travel paradox that asks a really wild question. What happens when objects or information travel back in time and seemingly have no origin?
Yeah, it's as crazy as it sounds. Here's the setup. Imagine you invent a gadget today, and then somehow it gets sent back in time. Someone in the past discovers it, studies it, and eventually recreates it. That recreation is what eventually gets sent forward again to you. So here's the kicker. Where did the invention actually come from? It seems to exist without ever being created. The object or information has no true origin. It's like it popped into existence from time itself. Now, let's make it relatable. Think about your favorite sci-fi movies. Maybe a character receives a piece of futuristic tech or a book from the future. They study it, use it, and it becomes the basis for the future version that goes back in time. At every step, everyone believes they invented it, but technically, no one ever did. Mind-bending, right? It's like a philosophical loop with no starting point. Philosophers and physicists love the bootstrap paradox because it challenges causality, the idea that every effect must have a cause. In this scenario, cause and effect get tangled into a loop. It makes you wonder, if time travel were possible, could we really trust history? Or could objects and ideas exist in a loop forever without origin? And here's a fun twist. The paradox isn't limited to objects. It can happen with information, too. Imagine a famous book or song set back in time, inspiring the exact work that eventually travels forward to the present. Who wrote it? No one, apparently. It just exists in an endless loop. This idea fascinates philosophers because it blurs the line between creation, discovery, and existence. So here's the kicker. The bootstrap paradox is a mind-bending reminder that time might not be linear, and causality might not be absolute. If an object or idea can exist in a loop with no origin, it forces us to rethink everything we take for granted about beginnings, endings, and the flow of events. Next time you think about time travel, inventions, or even the origin of ideas, remember the bootstrap paradox. Something might just appear out of nowhere, looping through time, leaving you wondering, did it ever really have a beginning at all? Negative utilitarianism. All right, buckle up, because this one is going to get a little dark, but in a thought-provoking way. It's called negative utilitarianism, a twist on traditional utilitarian ethics, and it asks a chilling question. What if the main goal of morality isn't to maximize happiness, but to minimize suffering? Here's the idea. Classic utilitarianism says, do whatever increases the most overall happiness. But negative utilitarianism flips that script. Instead of chasing pleasure, the focus is on reducing pain, suffering, or misery. On the surface, that sounds really compassionate. Who wouldn't want to prevent suffering? But here is where it gets controversial. If minimizing suffering is the ultimate moral goal, could extreme actions be justified? Like, hypothetically, ending all life to prevent future suffering. Yikes, right? Now, let's make it relatable. Think about everyday life. You see someone in pain, a friend upset, an animal suffering, or even a societal injustice. Negative utilitarianism says these moments of suffering carry more moral weight than moments of joy. preventing pain is morally more urgent than creating happiness. That's why it's sometimes called the anti-misery approach to ethics. Philosophers love discussing this because it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. If reducing suffering is our top priority, how far should we go? Does a small sacrifice justify a huge reduction in suffering? Where do you draw the line between preventing harm and taking extreme measures? It's unsettling, but it makes us rethink the very foundation of morality. And here's a fun twist. Negative utilitarianism also challenges modern thinking about progress and innovation. We usually celebrate advances that increase wealth, comfort, or entertainment. But if those same advances also risk increasing suffering in any form, even minimally, a strict negative utilitarian might argue they're ethically questionable. It's like flipping the moral compass upside down. So here's the kicker. Negative utilitarianism isn't just a thought experiment. It's a reminder that ethics isn't always comfortable or intuitive. Sometimes the morally right choice isn't the one that makes life better, but the one that prevents life from getting worse. And that tension between minimizing suffering and preserving other values is what makes this philosophy both fascinating and terrifying. Next time you think about morality, kindness, or societal progress, remember negative utilitarianism. It forces you to weigh suffering in ways you probably never considered, and it makes you question whether the pursuit of happiness should always come first.
The problem of free will and determinism. All right, get ready because this is going to make you question everything about your choices. The problem of free will and determinism. Basically, it asks, can you really be free if every action you take is determined by prior causes? Here's the setup. Determinism is the idea that every event, including your thoughts, decisions, and actions, is caused by previous events according to natural laws. In other words, everything you do is, in theory, predictable if someone had complete information about the universe. That sounds like science is awesome, until you realize it might wipe out the very notion of free will. Now, let's make it relatable. Think about deciding what to eat for breakfast. You might feel like you're making a free choice, but determinism says your choice is influenced by your upbringing, biology, mood, and even the weather. Every free decision is really the result of countless factors beyond your control. So, are you really choosing? Or are you just a complex machine following cause and effect chains? Here's where philosophers get really creative. Some, called compatibilists, argue that free will can still exist even in a deterministic universe. Their reasoning, freedom isn't about absolute randomness. It's about acting according to your desires and reasoning without external coercion. In other words, you can still be free as long as you act in line with your internal motivations, even if those motivations are determined by prior causes. But others, called incompatibilists, disagree. They say true free will is impossible if determinism is true. If your thoughts and choices are predetermined, can you really be morally responsible for them? This raises huge questions for ethics, law, and even how we blame or praise people. If someone's choice wasn't free, can we hold them accountable? And here's a fun twist. Modern neuroscience adds fuel to the debate. Experiments showed that brain activity predicting decisions occurs before people consciously make them. Does that mean free will is an illusion? Or does consciousness still play a unique role in interpreting and endorsing actions? The jury's out, and that's what keeps this problem endlessly fascinating. So here's the kicker. The problem of free will and determinism challenges how we see ourselves as agents in the world. Are you truly in control, or just a passenger on a causal roller coaster? The tension between freedom and determinism isn't just philosophical. It affects morality, responsibility, and the very way we live our lives. Next time you make a choice, from small decisions to life-changing ones, think about whether it's really yours. The universe may be a lot more determined than we like to imagine, but the question of freedom keeps our minds wrestling with meaning, responsibility, and what it truly means to act. The ontological argument for God. All right. Get ready, because this one is classic philosophy at its most brain-twisting. The ontological argument for God. It's basically an attempt to prove that God exists purely through logic, without needing evidence from the world. Yeah, philosophers really tried to do that. Here's the idea. It starts with a bold claim. God is a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. In other words, God is the ultimate, most perfect being imaginable. Now, the argument goes like this. If God exists only in our minds, then we can imagine a greater being, one that exists in reality as well. But that would contradict the definition of God as the greatest possible being. Therefore, God must exist in reality. Boom! Mind blown. Now, let's make it relatable. Imagine you picture the perfect ice cream sundae. If that sundae exists only in your imagination, you can always think of an even better one, maybe with extra chocolate, sprinkles, or whipped cream. But if it existed in reality, it would be maximally perfect. The ontological argument works the same way. It's a logical leap from imagination to existence, applied to God. Philosophers have debated this for centuries. Some, like Anselm of Canterbury, thought it was airtight logic. Others, like Immanuel Kant, weren't impressed. Kant argued that existence isn't a predicate. You can't define something into existence. Basically, no amount of fancy reasoning can make a being exist in reality just because you define it as perfect. Ouch! Here's where it gets fun. The ontological argument isn't just about theology. It's about logic, language, and the limits of reasoning. Can we ever prove something exists purely through definitions? Or does reality always require observation and evidence? The argument forces us to wrestle with the relationship between our ideas and the world outside our minds. And yes, it can get playful too. People have made ontological arguments for things like a perfect island, showing how absurd it can be if logic is pushed too far. But the debate remains deeply influential in philosophy, especially in metaphysics and theology. So here's the kicker. The ontological argument is a reminder that philosophy can reach for the impossible, trying to leap from thought to reality. It shows how far human reasoning can stretch, and also how careful we have to be when we assume that what can be imagined must exist. Next time you think about God,
perfection, or even your wildest imaginings, remember the ontological argument. It's a wild ride from definition to existence, and it's proof that philosophy doesn't just ask questions, it bends reality in your mind.
The principle of sufficient reason. All right, get ready, because this one dives straight into a fundamental rule philosophers love to debate: the principle of sufficient reason. The idea is deceptively simple. Everything must have a reason or explanation for why it is the way it is. Nothing just happens without a cause, or so this principle says. Here's the setup. Think about literally anything: the chair you're sitting on, the song you're listening to, or even the fact that you're alive and reading this. According to this principle, there's a reason behind each of these things. There's a cause, an explanation, or some underlying principle. It's the philosophical equivalent of saying there's no free lunch in the universe. Everything has a why. Now, let's make it relatable. Ever wondered why you bumped into someone on the street at exactly the right moment? Or why you chose coffee instead of tea this morning? According to this principle, there's a reason behind every event, every choice, even coincidences. It doesn't mean the reason is obvious. It could be hidden in a web of causes, but something is always making it happen. Philosophers like Leibniz use this principle to argue for some big ideas, including the existence of God. Leibniz said, "If everything has an explanation, then there must ultimately be a sufficient reason for the universe itself, a reason that isn't explained by anything else." In other words, there has to be some ultimate cause or necessary being. That's heavy stuff, and it shows how a simple principle about reasons can scale all the way up to cosmology. And here's where it gets tricky. Some events, especially in modern physics like quantum fluctuations, seem random. Do they violate the principle? Philosophers and scientists debate this endlessly. The principle is tempting because it gives the universe a kind of order, a sense that nothing is arbitrary, but it also forces us to confront the limits of human understanding. Maybe some explanations are beyond our reach, but the principle keeps pushing us to look for them. So here's the kicker. The principle of sufficient reason reminds us that curiosity isn't optional. It's built into reality itself. Every event, every choice, even quirks of existence has a reason lurking somewhere. Philosophy, science, and even everyday thinking are all about chasing those reasons. Next time you catch yourself asking, "Why did this happen?" remember the principle of sufficient reason. It's the idea that the universe isn't just a jumble of random events. There's always a hidden thread waiting to be unraveled,
even if it drives your brain a little crazy along the way.
The paradox of the stone. All right, get ready, because this one is a classic brain twister in philosophy. The paradox of the stone. It asks a simple yet mind-bending question. Can an omnipotent being create a stone so heavy that it cannot lift it? Yeah, that's the kind of question that makes your head spin. Here's the setup. Imagine a being that can do absolutely anything. Limitless power, no restrictions, total omnipotence. Now, you ask, can this being make a stone so heavy that even they cannot lift it? If the answer is yes, then there's something the being cannot do. Lift the stone. If the answer is no, then there's something the being cannot do. Create the stone. Either way, it seems like omnipotence runs into a logical problem. Now, let's make it relatable. Think of it like giving a superhero ultimate strength and asking them to bench press a weight so heavy that even their muscles fail. It's a paradox because the scenario is self-contradictory. It's impossible to frame the question in a way that preserves true, limitless power. The paradox isn't necessarily about actual stones or gods. It's about the limits of logic and language when we talk about absolute concepts. Philosophers love debating this one because it exposes a tension between the idea of unlimited power and logical consistency. Some argue that omnipotence shouldn't be interpreted as the power to do the logically impossible. In other words, creating a stone's too heavy to lift is not a thing that can be done. It's a nonsensical scenario, like a square circle. Omnipotence might be bound by the rules of logic itself. And here's where it gets fun. The paradox of the stone isn't just a thought experiment for theologians. It's a mental gem for anyone who loves stretching their brain. It forces you to ask, what does unlimited really mean? Can true power exist if it must obey logic? Or is logic itself a human constraint on imagining the infinite? So here's the kicker. The paradox of the stone reminds us that some ideas, like absolute power, can create questions that twist logic into knots. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but it makes you think deeply about limits, language, and the very nature of possibility. Next time you imagine an all-powerful being, remember the stone. Even infinite power has its paradoxes, and sometimes the fun is in watching your mind try and fail to lift it.
Epistemic closure. All right, get ready, because this one is going to make you question what you really know. Epistemic closure. It's a principle in philosophy of knowledge that asks a deceptively simple question. If you know something, and that thing logically implies something else, do you automatically know the second thing? Here's the setup. Imagine you know that it's raining outside. That fact, in turn, implies that the streets are wet. Epistemic closure says that, logically, if you know the first thing, rain,
you should also know the second thing: wet streets. Sounds straightforward, right? But philosophers love pushing this principle to its limits, especially in situations where knowledge is less obvious. Now, let's make it relatable. Suppose you know your friend is a great cook. That might imply they can make a delicious cake. But do you actually know that for sure? Maybe they're amazing at pasta, but terrible with desserts. Epistemic closure forces you to confront the difference between logical implication and actual knowledge. Just because one fact implies another doesn't mean you automatically know the second fact in practice. Here's where it gets really mind-bending. Skeptical scenarios, like the idea that you might be dreaming or living in a simulation, challenge epistemic closure. For example, you know you have hands. That fact implies you're not a brain in a vat being tricked into thinking you have hands. But do you really know you're not a brain in a vat? Skeptics say, nope. Just because X implies Y doesn't guarantee knowledge of Y. Suddenly, a principle that seemed obvious becomes a puzzle. Philosophers debate whether epistemic closure is an essential feature of knowledge or just a convenient assumption. Some argue that closure is vital. Knowledge should be able to carry its logical consequences. Others say that real-world uncertainty makes strict closure unrealistic. In other words, knowledge isn't always a perfectly logical chain. Sometimes it's messy, conditional, and context-dependent. So here's the kicker. Epistemic closure reminds us that knowing something is trickier than it seems. Our brains love chains of logic, but reality doesn't always cooperate. Just because one fact implies another doesn't mean your mind automatically grabs it. It's a subtle, fascinating puzzle about how knowledge works and how fragile it can be. Next time you feel certain about something, think about epistemic closure. The chain of what you know and what you think you know might be longer and shakier than you imagined. The paradox of analysis. All right, get ready, because this one is a real thinker. The paradox of analysis. It's a philosophical problem that asks, when we try to define something, why does every definition seem either obvious or wrong? Sounds simple, but it's surprisingly tricky. Here's the setup. Imagine you want to define what bachelor means. You might say, a bachelor is an unmarried man. Seems perfect, right? But then you notice something strange. On one hand, your definition is trivial. You're just restating what a bachelor is in different words. On the other hand, if you try to define it in a deeper or more detailed way, you risk being false, maybe including men who are married or excluding some edge cases. Philosophers realized that definitions are weird. They either tell you nothing new or risk being wrong. Now, let's make it relatable. Think about trying to define love, happiness, or art.
Every definition you come up with either feels obvious, like love is caring for someone, or it misses something, like the complicated emotions, cultural nuances, or experiences behind it. The paradox shows why language and understanding are messy. We want clear-cut definitions, but life doesn't always cooperate. Here's where it gets fun. Philosophers like G.E. Moore and Frege explored this paradox, trying to figure out if analysis could actually capture truth. The question isn't just academic. It's about how we communicate, reason, and think. When you argue with a friend about the meaning of a word, you're bumping into the paradox. Definitions are either tautologies or risky approximations. And here's a fun twist. This paradox also shows up in science and law. Scientists try to define concepts like species or life, and lawyers try to define reasonable doubt or theft. Every time they run into the same problem. Either the definition is obvious but uninformative, or it's informative but potentially inaccurate. It's a subtle headache that makes philosophy, law, and science endlessly interesting. So here's the kicker. The paradox of analysis reminds us that definitions are trickier than they seem. Words are powerful, but capturing the essence of things in language is never simple. Every attempt to pin down meaning teaches us a little more about the limits and the beauty of human understanding. Next time you try to define something, remember the paradox of analysis. You might realize your perfect definition is either painfully obvious or dangerously incomplete. And that's exactly what makes thinking philosophically so fascinating.
Hicks eschatological verification. All right, get ready, because this one dives straight into philosophy of religion and might make you think about life and the afterlife in a whole new way. Hicks eschatological verification. It asks a fascinating question. Can we ever verify certain religious claims, and if so, when? Here's the setup. Philosopher John Hick argued that some religious statements, like "there is life after death," or "God rewards the good and punishes the wicked," can't be tested or verified during our current life. They are essentially untestable while we're alive. The kicker? They could be verified in the future, specifically after death. Hence the term eschatological verification, which literally means verification at the end of time, or afterlife. Now let's make it relatable. Think about promises you've heard in life. If you work hard, you'll be rewarded someday. Sometimes we can't see the results immediately, and we have to trust the statement until the future arrives. Hicks says religious claims work in a similar way. Their truth isn't provable now, but they might become obvious later, like a cosmic scoreboard that only reveals results after the final whistle. Here's where it gets mind-bending. Some philosophers criticize this idea, saying it makes religious statements meaningless in practical terms, because if you can't test them now, how can they guide behavior? Others, including Hick, argue that the potential for future verification keeps these claims meaningful. They can still shape belief, morality, and expectation, even if the evidence is delayed. And here's a fun twist. This concept isn't just for religion. It can apply to any claim about the distant future. Imagine predicting scientific discoveries, societal outcomes, or even space exploration milestones. Some truths might only become testable or observable much later, stretching our understanding of what it means to know something. So here's the kicker. Hicks' eschatological verification forces us to confront the limits of knowledge in our lifetime. Some things might remain mysteries until the very end, and that doesn't make them irrelevant. It just makes patience, faith, or philosophical reflection a part of the journey. Next time you think about big claims, religious, moral, or cosmic, remember Hick. Some truths may be out of reach now, waiting for a future moment to reveal themselves. And that's exactly what makes thinking about them so fascinating.
Philosophical fatalism. All right, buckle up, because this one can get a little existential. Philosophical fatalism. It asks a question that might make you groan in existential dread. If all events are predetermined, does anything we do actually matter? Here's the setup. Philosophical fatalism is the idea that the future is already fixed. Every choice, every action, every moment of your life is already written in some cosmic sense. That means, technically, no matter how hard you try to change things, the outcomes are predetermined. If you succeed, fail, love, or lose, you are always going to. Now, let's make it relatable. Imagine trying to study for an exam or train for a marathon. Fatalism says you will get the score or finish the race you were always destined to get, regardless of your effort. That can feel liberating or terrifying depending on your mood. On one hand, you could say, hey, why stress? It's already set. On the other hand, it might make all the struggle feel meaningless. Philosophers debate whether fatalism really negates moral responsibility. Some argue that even if the future is fixed, effort and decision-making still matters psychologically and socially. We still act as if our choices matter. Others take it more radically. If everything is predetermined, concepts like heroism, justice, or moral effort are illusions. It's a tough pill to swallow. And here's a fun twist. Fatalism has appeared in literature, movies, and pop culture for centuries. Think Greek tragedies like Oedipus Rex, where every action seems doomed by fate. Or modern sci-fi, where time loops or predestined outcomes dominate the plot. It's a theme that fascinates because it forces us to confront the tension between freedom and inevitability. So here's the kicker. Philosophical fatalism makes you question the meaning of effort, choice, and morality. But it also pushes us to appreciate the illusion of freedom we experience day to day. Even if the future is written, how we live in the present, our thoughts, decisions, and actions still feels meaningful. And maybe that's the point. Next time you feel stressed about outcomes or choices, remember fatalism. Even if destiny has a script, the act of living it, experiencing it, and wrestling with it is what makes life rich, challenging, and endlessly fascinating.
Ethical non-naturalism. All right, let's dive into something that might make you rethink how morality works. Ethical non-naturalism. The idea here is bold and a little mind-bending. Morality exists independently of the physical world. In other words, right and wrong aren't just social constructs, feelings, or biological instincts. They exist in their own realm, separate from matter and energy. Here's the setup. Imagine someone says, "Stealing is wrong." An ethical non-naturalist would argue that this statement is true, not because of social convention, not because stealing causes harm, but because moral truths exist independently. Think of them as discovering a kind of moral landscape. There are peaks of goodness and valleys of wrongness, and we're trying to navigate it. Now, let's make it relatable. You've probably felt that some things are just wrong, even if society condones them. Maybe you saw someone cheating or lying and felt instinctively that it was wrong, even if no law was broken. Ethical non-naturalists say this feeling isn't just a subjective opinion. It reflects objective moral truths that exist out there waiting to be recognized. Here's where it gets fascinating. Critics ask, if moral truths exist independently, how do we know them? How do we see the moral landscape? Philosophers like G.E. Moore suggest we have a kind of moral intuition, a way to perceive goodness like we perceive colors or shapes. It's not about deduction or science, it's about a special kind of awareness or understanding. And here's a fun twist. Ethical non-naturalism has implications for debates about morality across cultures and time. If morality exists independently, then some acts could be objectively right or wrong, even if a society doesn't recognize them. Slavery, injustice, or cruelty could be condemned not just socially, but as objectively immoral, regardless of opinion or law. So here's the kicker. Ethical non-naturalism challenges the idea that morality is invented or subjective. It suggests that good and bad are real in a profound way, and part of philosophy's task is to uncover them. Next time you feel certain about right or wrong, think of it as a glimpse of a moral reality that exists beyond the physical world, and that's what makes life, choices, and ethics so endlessly fascinating.
The Prisoner's Dilemma. Iterated. All right, get ready because this one is a classic mix of psychology, strategy, and philosophy. The Prisoner's Dilemma, specifically the iterated version. It shows how cooperation can emerge even in situations that seem totally competitive. Here's the setup. Imagine two people are caught committing a crime. They're separated and each given a choice: betray the other or stay silent. If both betray, they get moderate punishment. If one betrays and the other stays silent, the betrayer goes free and the silent one gets a harsh sentence. If both stay silent, they get light punishment. Sounds like a nightmare, right? Each person is tempted to betray, but the best outcome overall happens when both cooperate. Now, the twist in the iterated version, you don't just play once, you play repeatedly with the same partner. Suddenly, strategy becomes about trust, reputation, and anticipating the other person's moves. Philosophers, mathematicians, and evolutionary theorists found something amazing.
Even in a world where betrayal seems tempting, cooperation can naturally evolve over time. Mutual cooperation often becomes the winning strategy because betrayal has long-term costs. Let's make it relatable. Think about friendships, workplace relationships, or even traffic. You can try to win by acting selfishly, but if you repeatedly interact with the same people, cooperation and trust often produce the best outcomes. The iterated dilemma teaches us why societies, norms, and moral behaviors can emerge even in competitive environments. It's a game theory explanation for why we can get along. Here's where it gets philosophical. Some thinkers use the iterated prisoner's dilemma to explain morality itself. Morality isn't just about rules imposed from above. It can arise naturally from repeated interactions where cooperation benefits everyone. In other words, ethics might be a rational strategy as much as a moral imperative. And here's a fun twist. In the real world, the dilemma pops up everywhere, from international politics to climate agreements. Countries face choices similar to prisoners: cooperate for the long-term benefit or betray for short-term gain. The iterated version shows why trust, communication, and repeated engagement are so crucial. So here's the kicker. The iterated prisoner's dilemma teaches us that even in a competitive universe, cooperation isn't just possible, it can be the most rational strategy. Next time you negotiate, collaborate, or even share a snack, remember, philosophy, math, and evolution agree, trust and reciprocity often win in the long run.
Moral luck. All right, get ready, because this one is a bit unsettling. Moral luck. It's the idea that the morality of your actions can depend on things completely outside your control. Yep, sometimes life's randomness decides if you're judged good or bad, even if you tried your best. Here's the setup. Imagine two drivers, both equally careless, but in slightly different situations. One makes a small mistake and nothing happens. The other makes the exact same mistake, but a pedestrian gets hurt. Most people would say the second driver is morally worse, but the only difference is sheer luck. That's moral luck in action. The consequences of your actions, which you can't fully control, affect how morally responsible you appear. Now, let's make it relatable. Think about daily life, interviews, sports, investments, or even relationships. Sometimes you do everything right, but circumstances beyond your control change the outcome. Maybe a storm ruins your carefully planned picnic, or a coworker steals credit for your hard work. Moral luck shows how fragile and unpredictable our judgments about right and wrong can be. Here's where it gets philosophical. Some thinkers, like Thomas Nagel and Bernard Williams, argue that moral luck is a challenge to traditional ideas of responsibility. If morality depends partly on chance, How fair is it to praise or blame someone? Do we need to rethink ethics in a world where luck plays a role in outcomes? It's uncomfortable but fascinating because it forces us to face the randomness built into human life. And here's a fun twist. Moral luck doesn't just happen in extreme cases. It shows up in subtle ways too, like timing, context, or even genetics. The more we notice it, the more we realize how often morality intersects with fortune. It's like life has a built-in roulette wheel that spins alongside your choices. So here's the kicker. Moral luck reminds us that being moral isn't just about intention, it's also about chance. It forces us to be humble in judgment and empathetic when evaluating others' actions. Next time you see someone fail despite doing their best, or succeed by sheer luck, remember moral luck. Life isn't fair, and philosophy helps us see why our judgments often reflect that reality.
The grandfather paradox. All right, buckle up, because this one is pure time travel chaos. The grandfather paradox. It's a thought experiment that asks, what happens if you travel back in time and do something that makes your own existence impossible? Yeah, it's exactly as mind-bending as it sounds. Here's the setup. Imagine you invent a time machine, or stumble into one like in the movies, and travel back to meet your grandfather before your parents were born. Then, somehow, you prevent him from meeting your grandmother. The problem? If they never met, one of your parents wouldn't exist, which means you wouldn't exist, which means you couldn't have gone back in time in the first place. Boom. Instant paradox. Now, let's make it relatable. Think about messing with small events in your past, like telling your younger self not to spill coffee on an essay. Minor changes seem harmless, but scale it up, and suddenly you're running into logical contradictions that make your head spin. That's the grandfather paradox in a nutshell. Messing with the past can break the very logic of cause and effect. Here's where it gets philosophical. Physicists and philosophers use this paradox to debate whether time travel is even possible. Some say the universe would prevent paradoxes naturally through self-consistency rules. Others imagine multiple timelines or parallel universes where you could interfere without erasing yourself. Basically, your actions might split reality into different branches, avoiding the logical contradiction. And here's a fun twist. The paradox isn't just about sci-fi storytelling. It reveals something deeper about causality and logic. It forces us to ask, is the past fixed, or can it be changed? If it can't be changed, what does that say about free will? If it can, what does that do to reality itself? Time travel isn't just a cool plot device. It's a philosophical playground. So here's the kicker. The grandfather paradox reminds us that time isn't as simple as a straight line, and tampering with it, even in thought experiments, creates mind-bending contradictions. Next time you watch a time travel movie or imagine revisiting the past, remember, messing with history isn't just risky, it might be logically impossible. The problem of universals. All right, get ready, because this one is going to make you rethink how we see the world.
The problem of universals asks a deceptively simple question. Are properties, like redness, roundness, or sweetness, real things or just concepts in our minds? Here's the setup. Think about a red apple. You see its redness, and you think, oh, red. But here's the tricky part. Does redness exist outside of the apple, as a real independent property? Or is it just a concept your brain uses to make sense of what it's seeing? Philosophers have debated this for centuries. Now, let's make it relatable. Imagine looking at a dozen apples. They're all red, but slightly different shades. Is there a single, real redness that all apples share? Or is it just your mind categorizing similar experiences into the concept of red? This question seems abstract, but it actually affects how we think about reality, language, and even science. Here's where it gets deep. Realists about universals argue that properties exist independently of our perception. They're out there in the world, part of reality itself. Nominalists, on the other hand, say that properties are just names we assign. They don't exist on their own. It's a battle between whether the world has built-in categories or whether categories are purely mental shortcuts. And here's a fun twist. The problem of universals pops up everywhere, even in tech and AI. When a computer recognizes objects, is it detecting real properties, or is it just following human-made labels? The debate isn't just ancient philosophy. It's surprisingly modern. So here's the kicker. The problem of universals forces us to ask what's really out there and what's just in our heads. When you notice patterns, colors, or traits, are you discovering objective reality, or are you creating it in your mind? Next time you pick up an apple, admire its redness, but also wonder, is that red truly real, or just a story your brain tells?
The identity of indiscernibles. All right, get ready, because this one is a mind bender about existence itself. The identity of indiscernibles. It asks a deceptively simple question. If two things are identical in every single way, are they actually the same thing? Here's the setup. Imagine you have two perfectly identical billiard balls. They have the same mass, color, size, and atomic structure. In every measurable way, they're completely indistinguishable. Now ask yourself, are they really two separate balls? Or just one ball somehow duplicated? This is the puzzle philosophers call the identity of indiscernibles. Now, let's make it relatable. Think about identical twins. Even if they look the same, their experiences, memories, and personalities are different, so we know they're distinct individuals. But what if you could clone someone perfectly, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally? Are the two of them really separate?
The principle challenges how we understand identity beyond superficial traits. Here's where it gets deep. Philosophers like Leibniz argued that if there's truly no difference between two things, no internal or external distinctions, they must be the same. Others argue that context or location matters. Even if two objects are identical, being in different places or interacting with different environments makes them distinct. It's a debate that touches on metaphysics, physics, and even quantum mechanics. And here's a fun twist. The identity of indiscernibles is relevant in science fiction and AI. Imagine perfectly identical robots or digital minds. Are they the same entity? Or are they separate because of their existence in different places or networks? The principle forces us to think about what it really means to be. So here's the kicker. The identity of indiscernibles challenges our intuitions about individuality and duplication. It makes us ask what truly makes something itself, and not just a perfect copy. Next time you see twins, duplicates, or clones in fiction, think about this principle and whether perfect similarity really means they're one and the same.
The Tragedy of the Commons. Philosophical twist. All right, buckle up, because this one's about human nature, ethics, and the surprisingly tricky way we interact with shared resources. The Tragedy of the Commons. You've probably heard the basic idea. Individuals acting in their own self-interest can deplete resources everyone relies on. But the philosophical twist makes it even more interesting. Here's the setup. Imagine a village with a common pasture for all its farmers. Each farmer benefits personally by grazing more cows than everyone else. But if every farmer does this, the pasture gets overgrazed and eventually nobody benefits. Classic tragedy, right? The philosophical twist is asking, why do rational, self-interested people create outcomes that are bad for everyone, including themselves? Now let's make it relatable. Think about modern examples: overfishing, climate change, or even hoarding toilet paper in a crisis. Everyone thinks, if I take more, I benefit. But if everyone does that, the resource disappears. Philosophy asks a deeper question. What does this say about morality, cooperation, and human nature? It forces us to confront the tension between short-term rationality and long-term collective good. Here's where it gets really fascinating. Philosophers like Garrett Hardin and later game theorists explored solutions: regulation, shared agreements, or cultural norms. The twist is that morality itself can emerge from repeated interactions, like in the iterated prisoner's dilemma. But it's fragile. Without rules, trust, or enforcement, even rational people can collectively destroy what sustains them. And here's a fun twist. The tragedy of the commons isn't just about resources. It applies to attention, social media, public spaces, and even moral integrity. Think about online discourse. Everyone seeking attention or outrage can degrade the shared commons of reasoned conversation. Philosophy isn't just talking about cows. It's talking about society, human behavior, and consequences. So here's the kicker.
The tragedy of the commons reminds us that our rational self-interest has limits, especially when it collides with the collective good. Next time you see people overusing or exploiting shared resources, remember, it's not just greed. It's a philosophical puzzle about cooperation, morality, and survival. How we navigate it defines whether society thrives or collapses. The principle of charity in interpretation. All right, get ready, because this one is about conversation, understanding, and thinking like a philosopher in everyday life. The principle of charity. It's deceptively simple, but incredibly powerful. The idea is, when interpreting someone else's argument, always assume the strongest, most rational version of it. Here's the setup. Imagine you're reading a friend's post or listening to a debate, and you encounter a claim that seems silly or obviously wrong. Most people jump to ridicule or dismiss it. The principle of charity says, pause. Ask yourself, how can I interpret this in a way that makes sense? How could their statement be rational or true in some context? By doing this, you avoid misunderstandings and actually engage with the real point they're trying to make. Now let's make it relatable. Think about social media arguments. Instead of immediately replying, "That's dumb," try imagining what the other person really means. Maybe they're missing some context, or they're using words differently. Applying the principle of charity can turn a frustrating exchange into a meaningful discussion. You're basically giving their argument the benefit of the doubt, but in a thoughtful, structured way. Here's where it gets philosophical. This principle isn't just about being nice, it's about getting closer to truth. Philosophers like Donald Davidson argue that communication assumes we're generally rational. If we always assume the other person is making sense, we can interpret, debate, and learn more effectively. It's a method for sharpening thinking while avoiding straw man arguments. And here's a fun twist. The principle of charity works in science too. When reading research or data that seems confusing, assume the methodology or logic has merit before dismissing it. Many breakthroughs have been hidden behind initial statements that seemed wrong or counterintuitive. Philosophical charity helps you look past appearances to the substance. So here's the kicker. The principle of charity reminds us that understanding beats reflexive judgment. Next time you disagree with someone, or even just read a confusing argument, try giving their words the strongest possible interpretation. Not only does it make you a better thinker, it might also teach you something new about the world and about people.
Nietzsche's eternal return as existential test. All right, get ready, because this one hits you right in the existential feels. Nietzsche's eternal return. It's not just a crazy abstract idea. It's a philosophical thought experiment that asks, would you be willing to live your life exactly the same way, over and over, forever? Here's the setup. Nietzsche imagined that everything you do, every choice, every joy, every heartbreak, repeats endlessly in an infinite loop. The catch? There's no changing it, no do-overs. It's like being trapped in a cosmic rerun of your own life. The big question, if you knew this, would you embrace it or despair? Now, let's make it relatable. Think about your daily habits, your decisions, even the mistakes you regret. Eternal return forces you to ask yourself, are you living a life worth repeating? It's a brutally honest mirror. Skipping that workout? Yelling at a friend? Binge watching instead of studying? If every action repeats forever, would you be proud of the life you're creating? Here's where it gets philosophical. Nietzsche didn't just want to scare us. He wanted to challenge us to affirm life, embrace our choices, and live deliberately. It's an existential test. Can you love your life enough to say yes to it every moment, no matter how messy or painful? In other words, eternal return isn't about determinism. It's about attitude and responsibility. And here's a fun twist. This idea shows up in pop culture more than you might think. Movies, games, and books often explore time loops or repeating lives, from Groundhog Day to Edge of Tomorrow. Each story echoes Nietzsche's challenge. If you knew your life was repeating, how would you live differently? So here's the kicker. Nietzsche's eternal return forces us to confront the weight of our choices and the way we experience life. Next time you make a decision, big or small, imagine it repeating infinitely. Would you be okay with that? If not, maybe it's a nudge to live more intentionally, fully, and courageously. Because, in a sense, your life is the only one you get to repeat.
The ship of fools metaphor in epistemology. All right, strap in, because we're ending this philosophical roller coaster with something both vivid and a little terrifying. The ship of fools. It's a metaphor that asks a simple but powerful question. What happens when society navigates reality while guided by collective ignorance? Here's the setup. Imagine a ship with a crew that has no real knowledge of navigation, no expertise, and no plan. Yet they're all convinced they know exactly where they're going. They bicker, ignore warnings, and make decisions based on assumptions rather than facts. That's the ship of fools, and philosophers use it to explore how humans often confront reality without sufficient understanding. Now, let's make it relatable. Think about the internet, social media, or even politics. People confidently share opinions, spread misinformation, or make decisions as if they're experts. But sometimes the collective direction leads straight into metaphorical rocks. The ship of fools isn't just about individuals. It's about how groups can act irrationally together while thinking they're in control. Here's where it gets philosophical. Epistemology, the study of knowledge, asks, how do we know what we know? The ship of fools shows what happens when critical thinking, skepticism, and humility are missing. Even smart people can contribute to collective errors if they fail to question assumptions or rely blindly on others. It's a warning about human overconfidence and the fragility of shared understanding. And here's a fun twist.
The metaphor has been used throughout history in literature, art, and philosophy. Medieval paintings depict literal ships of fools, while modern thinkers apply the metaphor to science, economics, and culture. It's timeless because, in some way, every society risks sailing blindly without careful reasoning and reflection. So, here's the kicker. The Ship of Fools reminds us that ignorance isn't just personal, it can be collective. Philosophy teaches us to question, think critically, and navigate life with awareness. Next time you see people confidently charging forward, pause and ask, are we steering the ship, or are we passengers on a vessel of folly? Awareness might be the only way to avoid crashing into reality's hidden reefs.